Greetings, fellow fans. You're tuned into LUMOUS What If, presenting to you today, Sirius Black escaped Azkaban early and used ancient black magic to legally adopt Harry at age 6. Show some love by liking and subscribing. Enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1, The Rite of the Long Night. The newspaper came in on a Thursday, though Sirius Black had stopped counting days somewhere in the second year, and only knew it was Thursday because the guard who threw it was the one with the limp, and the one with the limp came Thursdays. It wasn't a kindness. Nothing in Azkaban was a kindness. The guard, a wizard named Dello with a face like boiled meat, had a habit of reading the prophet on his rounds and then flicking it through the bars of whichever cell smelled worse that week, so the prisoners could learn what they were missing. He'd done it to Sirius 11 or 12 times. Usually, Sirius let it rot where it landed. But this one landed face up. The photograph took up a quarter of the front page. Albus Dumbledore, in robes the color of a bad bruise, shaking hands with a muggle woman in a hat at something called the Little Winging Summer Fair. Some nonsense about a charitable fund, an eccentric benefactor, the sort of story the prophet ran in July when nobody had died. Dumbledore was smiling. The muggle woman was smiling. The photograph moved the way wizarding photographs did, the same 3 seconds over and over, handshake and nod and beam. And in the bottom left corner, half-cropped by the edge of the frame, there was a boy. Sirius didn't move for a long time. The cold in Azkaban wasn't the sort that made you shiver, it was the sort that made you stop. He lay on the stone with his cheek against it and looked at 4 square inches of newsprint and felt something happen in his chest that hadn't happened in 5 years. A hot, ugly, living thing, like a coal turning over under ash. The boy was small. That was the first thing. Small in the way that meant wrong, not the way that meant young, because Sirius had held that baby when he was a year old and he had been a fat, furious, thrashing little monster who tried to eat Sirius's hair. This child was thin. He was wearing a jumper that came down past his knees and had been rolled at the sleeves 4 times, and he was standing well back from the adults, and he was looking at a table of cakes with an expression Sirius recognized. He recognized it because he'd seen it in a mirror, aged 9, at Grimmauld Place, on the 3rd day of not being allowed to eat. And on the boy's cheekbone, gray in the newsprint, there was a mark. The photograph looped, handshake, nod, beam. And every 3 seconds, the little boy at the edge of the frame looked at the cakes and then looked down at his shoes quickly, like someone had caught him. James, Sirius thought, and then didn't let himself think anything else for a while, because the Dementors came when you thought. They came anyway. He heard the temperature change before he felt it, a kind of silence sliding along the corridor, the way water slides. 2 of them stopped outside his cell. They always did. Sirius Black had been the best meal on the island for 5 years, a man with a very large amount of guilt and no ability to stop chewing it. He lay very still and let them look at him. And for the first time since the night they'd dragged him laughing off a muggle street with 12 corpses behind him, they found nothing to eat. Because the thing in his chest wasn't guilt. Guilt was warm and soft and it came apart in the mouth. This was a coal. This was I put him there and I gave him to Hagrid and I said take him, take the bike. I won't need it and I went after Peter instead of going after Harry, and none of that was grief. None of it was sorrow, it was all of it rage, and it was aimed with perfect precision at exactly one person, and that person was Sirius Orion Black. The Dementors drifted on down the corridor. They sounded, if a Dementor can sound anything, faintly confused. Sirius waited until the cold went out of the walls. Then he sat up and pulled the paper towards him with 2 fingers and folded it very carefully along the crease so that the corner with the boy in it lay on top. "All right," he said, out loud, and his voice came apart halfway through the second word because he hadn't used it in about a month. He coughed and spat and tried again. "All right, yes, fine." Then he laughed one short, cracked bark of it, ugly in the dark, because he had just realized something so obvious and so enormous that he genuinely could not understand how 5 years had gone by without it landing. He had been thinking about it wrong the entire time. He'd spent 5 years trying to prove he was innocent in his head to an imaginary jury, over and over, building the same argument out of the same 3 facts, and it had never once occurred to him that the wizarding world had a court older than the Wizengamot, and he was, as of 14 months ago, when a guard had mentioned it in passing and Sirius had barely heard its lord. Arcturus died, Dello had said, gossiping to another guard outside the cell. Old Black's dead. Whole line's a bloody mess now, nothing but women and Malfoys. Nothing but women and Malfoys. Because Arcturus Black, proud, cold, vicious old bastard that he was, had disinherited Sirius from his will, and struck him from the tapestry, and written him out of every document in the house. But he had never taken the ring. He'd never performed the severance. Because to sever an heir, the lord of the house must stand in the vault and name the crime aloud before the family magic, and the crime must be true, and Arcturus Black had known perfectly well that his grandson had never once broken an oath. The old man had hated him, but the old man had not lied to the blood. Sirius put his forehead against the wet stone and started, very quietly, to plan. It took him 9 days. 9 days of eating everything they gave him, which was the hardest part, because the food in Azkaban was a gray paste that came in a bowl with something already dead in it, and his body had spent 5 years learning to refuse. He ate it. He ate all of it and licked the bowl, and once when Dello forgot to collect the tray, he ate the bit that had dried on the rim. 9 days of moving in the dark. Not exercise, he didn't have the strength for exercise, but the dog did. The dog didn't know it was starving. The dog just knew it had somewhere to be. He'd shift at night, when the cold rolled through and the Dementors made their sweep, and he'd pace the cell on 4 legs until the muscle in his shoulders remembered what it was for. In 9 days of listening, Azkaban's fortress was a stone box, and stone boxes talk. Sirius learned the guard rotation, the tide, the hour when the boat came, the exact groaning note the outer door made when the wind came from the northwest. On the 10th night, the wind came from the northwest. He was Padfoot before the sound had finished. Not the great glossy grim of school days. This was something out of a bad dream. A black dog with its ribs showing through and its lips pulled off its teeth, moving low along the floor with its shoulder to the wall. The bars of an Azkaban cell are spelled against wizards. They are spelled against apparition, and portkeys, and phoenixes, and rope, and fire, and every enchantment the Department of Mysteries could think of in 1718. They are not spelled against dogs, because in 1718 nobody in the Ministry of Magic could conceive of a wizard so criminally stupid as to become an unregistered animagus. And by the time Sirius Black had proved them wrong, the paperwork had been in a drawer for 263 years. He turned sideways and pushed, and for one horrible moment his hips caught and he thought he was going to die there, half in and half out of his own cell like a cork in a bottle. Then the wind hit the tower and the whole building shuddered, and he came through and landed on the corridor stone with a click of claws that sounded, to him, like a dropped plate in a cathedral. Nothing came. He went down 11 flights of stairs in the dark, belly low, and twice he passed close enough to a Dementor to feel his fur frost, and both times the thing turned its hood towards him and found only a dog, hungry, cold, uncomplicated. No guilt to chew, no memory worth eating, just a great deal of want. The outer door was oak and iron and 40 feet of ward. The sea gate under it, where the tide flushed the drains, was a grill with a bar missing since 1943. Sirius Black swam out of Azkaban at 2:30 in the morning in November, and the North Sea nearly finished what the Dementors had started. He never remembered most of it. He remembered the first shock of the water going into his chest like a knife. He remembered the sound of the fortress behind him, which was no sound at all. He remembered, somewhere in the middle, losing the direction of the shore entirely and swimming for a long time towards a light that turned out to be a star. And he remembered the coal in his chest, which the water couldn't reach, and which said he's 6 years old every time his legs stopped working, and every time his legs started again. He came ashore near Cromer 11 hours later and lay in the shingle in the rain. A dog the size of a pony with salt in its eyes, and slept for 4 hours in a beach hut with a broken door. When he woke up, he was a man again, naked, bleeding from both hands, 40 pounds underweight and entirely, ferociously clear-headed. "Right," he said to the empty hut. "Bank. Gringotts does not close. This is one of those facts the wizarding public knows without ever thinking about, the way they know that the night bus exists and that you shouldn't look directly at a blast-ended scroot. The great bronze doors on Diagon Alley shut at 5 o'clock sharp. Gringotts does not close. There is a door on the north face of the building, in an alley too narrow for 2 men to pass, and it has no handle, and it opens for exactly 3 categories of person: goblins, debtors, and lords of the ancient houses. Sirius arrived at it at 11 minutes past midnight, wearing a fisherman's coat he'd stolen off a line in Sheringham, and a pair of boots he'd stolen off the same line and nothing else at all. He put his bleeding palm flat on the door. "Sirius Orion Black," he said, "son of Orion, son of Arcturus. I'm here for my ring and I'm here to buy a right, and if anyone in there wants to discuss the ministry's opinion of me, they can do it after." There was a pause of perhaps 4 seconds. Then the door swung inward on a corridor of black marble lit by nothing, and a very old goblin with a face like a folded map was standing at the end of it with his hands behind his back. "Lord Black," he said, "you look terrible. I've been on holiday." Sirius stepped inside. The door closed behind him without a sound. "You're Ragnarok." "I am a Ragnarok. There have been 6. The goblin turned and started walking, and Sirius followed him because the alternative was standing in a corridor bleeding. "Your grandfather sat where you're about to sit 11 times. Your great-grandmother 30. Your family has been very good business for a very long time. This is the only reason you are not currently being carried out in 2 bags. I'm touched." "You are tolerated," Ragnarok said, with the air of a man correcting a spelling error. "Sit down." The room they came to was small and warm and lined floor to ceiling with drawers. Ragnarok climbed into a chair behind a desk that was too big for him and folded his hands. And I have written back to ask under which clause of the Treaty of 1865 they believe they may instruct a sovereign institution as to the disposition of its client's property. Ragnarok's mouth did something that was not a smile, but occupied a similar space on the face. "I expect a reply in 6 weeks. They are very slow. It is one of their few charms." Sirius laughed. It hurt. "So you'll deal with me?" "I will deal with the Lord of the House of Black if such a person is sitting in front of me." "That is not yet established." Ragnarok pulled open a drawer without looking at it and lifted out a small black box. "Arcturus Black died on the 14th of September, 1985. He left a will disinheriting you in 17 separate clauses. It is, I am told, quite beautifully written. He'd have taken the trouble. He did not, however, perform severance. The goblin set the box on the desk and did not open it." "Do you know what that means?" "It means the ring never left the vault," said Sirius. "It means the family magic never accepted the disinheritance. It means for 14 months the House of Black has had no lord, and a house with no lord starts to rot, and I imagine the interest on that has been fascinating for you." Ragnarok looked at him for a moment. "You are less stupid than your reputation," he said. "I've had a lot of quiet time." The goblin opened the box. The ring inside was ugly. Sirius had always thought so. A heavy black band with a square-cut stone the color of a storm coming, and around the setting, in letters worn nearly smooth, TOUJOURSPUR. He'd been made to kiss it as a child. He'd been 11 years old the last time he'd touched it, and he'd wanted to throw it in the fire. He put it on his finger without hesitating. The pain was immediate and enormous and went up his arm and into his sternum like a hook, and Sirius bared his teeth and did not make a sound, because somewhere behind the pain there was something looking at him. Something old. Something with a very long memory that was, at that moment, going through 5 years of Azkaban and the night of the 31st of October, 1981, and a boy in a jumper at the edge of a photograph, and reading all of it at once. He heard very distinctly, in a voice that was not a voice, a single question. "Well?" "Yes," said Sirius Black out loud. "I'm what's left, take it or don't." The stone went warm. The pain stopped so abruptly that he nearly fell out of the chair, and when he straightened, something had changed in the room. Ragnarok's ears had gone flat. There was a faint smell of stone dust and cold air that hadn't been there before, and Sirius could feel, like a hand on the back of his neck, like a house you've woken up in, 311 vaults, 42 properties, a seat in the Wisengamot with 11 proxy votes attached, and one very angry portrait in a house in Islington that had just started screaming and would not stop for some hours. "Lord Black," said Ragnok. "Ragnok, congratulations. What do you want?" Sirius leaned forward and put both elbows on the desk, and the coal in his chest turned over. "I want the hearthblood." The office went absolutely silent. Ragnok did not move for a full 10 seconds. When he did, it was to take off his spectacles and clean them on his sleeve, slowly, which Sirius suspected was the goblin equivalent of a man sitting down hard. "That rite," Ragnok said, "has been performed 4 times in this building in 900 years, 5 after tonight. The last time was 1604, and the man who requested it was refused, and the reason he was refused is that he was lying, and the reason we know he was lying is that we let him begin, and the family magic took his hand off at the wrist and cauterized the stump, and he bled to death in the 4th chamber over a period of 9 minutes while shouting his own name." Ragnok put his spectacles back on. "We had to reconsecrate the floor. It was extremely inconvenient. Then it's a good thing I'm not lying. Every man who has ever come to me for a ritual has said something very like that." The goblin's black eyes did not blink. "Do you actually know what you are asking for, Lord Black? Or have you read the name in a book and decided it sounded like an answer?" Sirius held up his hand with the ring on it. "The hearthblood rite," he said, "blood adoption. Not the modern kind, not a form at the ministry with a blood quill signature and a fee. The old one. A lord of an ancient house takes a child of another line into his own blood, and the child becomes his, in blood, in magic, in law, and it cannot be undone by any authority in Britain, because it wasn't granted by any authority in Britain. It predates the Wisengamot. It predates the statute. The ministry can't overturn it because the ministry never had the power to grant it in the first place." He was speaking faster now, and his hands had started to shake, and he let them. "And it's judged by the magic. That's the point. That's the whole point. You can't take a child into your blood if you murdered his parents. You can't do it if you broke an oath to them. A kinslayer can't do it. An oathbreaker can't do it. A betrayer can't do it." "No," said Ragnok, "he cannot. I was James Potter's secret keeper for 6 days, Sirius said. Then we swapped. We gave it to Peter Pettigrew, because I was the obvious choice and that made me the wrong one. And I was so clever, Ragnok. I was so pleased with myself. And Peter sold them inside the week, and then blew up a street and cut off his own finger and left me standing there laughing like a lunatic because there wasn't anything else left to do. So you say." "So I say," Sirius bared his teeth. "But the right doesn't care what I say, that's why I want it. I could stand in the middle of the ministry atrium and shout the truth for a year, and Barty Crouch would have me back on that island by tea time. But if I take Harry Potter into the blood of the House of Black, and the family magic accepts it, then either the right is a lie or my conviction is, and there are exactly 4 people alive who could stand in front of the Wisengamot and argue that the hearthblood is a lie, and 3 of them work for you." Ragnok considered him for a long moment, and the 4th, he said, "is Albus Dumbledore." "Yes." "Who placed the boy where he is." "Yes." "Who will not be pleased." "I'd say that's between him and God," said Sirius, "except I've met him and I'm not sure he's decided which of them is which." Ragnok laughed. It was a horrible sound, like a chair dragged over gravel, and it went on for some time. "There is a price," he said when he'd finished. "Name it. You have not asked what it is." "Ragnok," said Sirius wearily, "I've been awake for 4 days. I swam the North Sea. My hands don't work properly, and there is a 6-year-old boy in Surrey who flinches at cake. Name it." The goblin's amusement drained away and left something colder underneath, and Sirius understood, quite suddenly, that the last 20 minutes had been the pleasant part. "The hearthblood requires a hearth," Ragnok said. "The House of Blacks is in the 4th chamber, and it has not been lit since 1604 because we sealed it, and it is our fire, Lord Black, kindled in our stone, maintained at our expense, in a chamber your family rents and has never owned. The rent has been paid at the same rate since 1213. It is 11 galleons a year." He let that sit. "Your family has been laughing about it for 7 centuries. Every Lord Black in living memory has made the same joke at this desk. Your grandfather made it twice." Sirius said nothing. "I want the chamber," said Ragnarok. "Freehold, written in the blood ledger, unbreakable in perpetuity. And I want you to say in front of witnesses that the House of Black holds its oldest hearth at the sufferance of the Goblin Nation." "Done." "You have not done," said Sirius. "Get a quill, get 12 quills. I'll say it in the atrium if you like. I'll say it in the prophet. I'll have it engraved over the front door of Grimald Place, and I will personally hold my mother's portrait's eyes open while she reads it." Ragnarok stared at him. "You are," he said slowly, "either the most reckless human being I have ever done business with, or the first one in 800 years to understand what I am actually selling." "Can it be both?" The goblin rang a small brass bell. "Bring the ledger," he said to the thing that answered it. "And wake the ritual house, all of it. And send someone to find Lord Black some clothes, because I will not have the fourth chamber consecrated by a man in a fisherman's coat." Number 4, Privet Drive, at 3:10 in the morning, was the quietest house on a street of quiet houses. The great black dog came over the back fence like water going the wrong way, and landed in the flower bed without a sound. It stood in the dark for a while with its nose up, reading the garden, cut grass, creosote bins, a cat 2 houses down, bacon fat in a pan through the kitchen window, and under all of it, faint and stale and everywhere, the smell of a child who had been in this house a long time and had never once been anywhere in it that was his. The dog put its paws up on the kitchen windowsill. Sirius stood, and the man who came up out of the dog was not shaking anymore. The back door had a lock and a bolt, and neither of them survived the next 4 seconds. The wood simply gave up around them, quietly, the way things do when somebody with a great deal of family magic and no patience at all asks them to. He stepped into the kitchen. Clean, aggressively clean. There was a chart on the fridge in a child's handwriting that said Dudley Star Chart and had 41 stars on it, and beneath it a second, smaller list in an adult's hand, headed CHORES, and Sirius read 4 lines of it and had to stop and put his hand flat on the counter for a moment. He went into the hall. The stairs went up on his right. Under them, where in any normal house there is a cupboard full of hoovers and coats and a box of Christmas decorations nobody wants, there was a small door with a bolt on the outside. There was a bolt on the outside. Sirius Black stood in the dark hallway of number 4, Privet Drive, and looked at that bolt. And for about 10 seconds the entire universe narrowed to a single, beautifully simple idea, which was that there were 3 people asleep upstairs, and he had a wand in his hand, and the House of Black knew a great many spells and nobody would ever have to know. He'd known men who did it, he'd fought them, he'd put 4 of them in the ground. He drew a breath and let it out. Then he knelt down on the hall carpet and drew the bolt, and opened the door as gently as he'd ever done anything in his life. The cupboard smelled of dust and spiders and faintly of a child. There was a thin mattress. There was a blanket with a picture of a car on it that had been washed until the car was a suggestion. There were 3 broken plastic soldiers lined up on a ledge, arranged with care, in order of size. And there was a boy asleep with his back to the door, and his knees drawn up and one arm over his head, in the exact position Sirius had seen 100 times in Azkaban, which was the position a person sleeps in when part of them is still listening. His hair was black and stuck up at the back in a cowlick Sirius had last seen on a man of 21 leaning over a cot saying, "Look at it, Padfoot, look. It's exactly like mine, Lily's furious." Sirius sat down on the hall floor. He didn't trust his legs. "Harry," he said. The boy came awake all at once without a sound, and that was the worst thing yet. No mumble, no stretch. He went from asleep to sitting with his back against the wall in less than a second, and his eyes, enormous, green, James's face and Lily's eyes, and someone had put him in a cupboard, found Sirius in the dark and went very wide. "I'm sorry," Harry said immediately. "You haven't done anything." "I'm sorry," said Harry again, faster. "I didn't, whatever it was, I didn't do it on purpose. I'll fix it, I can fix it. Please don't wake Uncle Vernon, Harry. He's got work in the morning, Harry." The boy stopped. He was breathing hard. He'd got one hand behind him, flat on the mattress, ready to push. He was 6 years old and he had a strategy. Sirius made himself sit very still and put his hands where they could be seen. "You haven't done anything wrong," he said. "Nobody's angry. Nobody's going to be angry. I'm not here about anything you did." Harry watched him. "Are you a burglar?" he said. "No, you broke the door, I heard it." "Yes, I did." Sirius felt his mouth pull sideways. "That's fair, all right. Technically, I broke in, but I'm not here for the telly." "There's nothing worth stealing," said Harry with an odd little flatness. "Aunt Petunia keeps the good spoons in the sideboard, but they're not really silver." "Noted. I'll leave the spoons." Sirius shifted slowly so that he was sitting cross-legged, which put his head lower than the boys. "Harry, do you know your parents' names?" A long pause. "James and Lily Potter," Harry said. "They died in a car crash. My dad was drunk." Something happened behind Sirius's eyes. It took him 3 full seconds to get it back under control, and he was aware the whole time that the boy was watching him do it and cataloging it and getting ready to run. "Right," he said very calmly. "So, 2 things. The first is that your mother's name was Lily and she had your eyes and she was the best witch of her year and she once hexed a boy so badly he had a tail for a fortnight. The second is that your father was called James, and he never in his life drove a car because he thought cars were slow, and he died on his feet in his own front hall with no wand in his hand because he'd left it on the sofa, buying your mother 30 seconds to get up the stairs with you." The cupboard was very quiet. "Which," said Harry, "of everything that was the word he picked." "Yes." "You're not allowed to say that." He said it in the tone of a child reciting a rule he'd been hit for. "There's no such thing." "Harry," Sirius held out his hand, palm up. "Watch." He didn't have his wand out. He didn't need it. The ring on his finger was practically humming, and the House of Black had never in its long and disgraceful history required a wand for anything as small as this. A light woke up in the middle of his palm. Not a spell so much as a mood, a warm, drowsy, gold-colored light about the size of a marble, and it rose off his hand and hung in the air of the cupboard, and it drifted and settled on one of the 3 broken plastic soldiers, and the soldier stood up and saluted and sat back down. Harry Potter made a small sound. "Magic's real," said Sirius. "You're a wizard. Your mum was a witch and your dad was a wizard, and you are the single most famous small boy in the country, and there are about 400 people in Britain right now who would step in front of a train for you, and every last one of them thinks you're being raised somewhere nice." "I'm not famous," said Harry. He hadn't taken his eyes off the light. "I'm nothing." "Who told you that?" Silence. "All right," said Sirius. "We'll come back to it." He leaned back against the banister post. "My name's Sirius, Sirius Black. Your father was my best friend from the day I was 11 years old to the day he died. And I'm your godfather, which is a promise I made in front of a lot of people when you were 3 days old, and I have been extremely, catastrophically bad at it, and I'm here to start being less bad at it. Starting tonight. Starting now." Harry's eyes came off the light and onto him. "Where were you?" he said, and there it was. 6 years old, and he went straight for the throat, no wind up, no flinch, and Sirius thought, "Oh, there you are, prongs." "Prison," said Sirius. "For something I didn't do. I got out 10 days ago." "Oh," said Harry, "you can ask." "Aunt Petunia says I ask too many questions." "Aunt Petunia," said Sirius, "is going to have a very interesting Tuesday. Ask." Harry thought about it. He was still braced against the wall, but the hand behind him had come out and was picking at the blanket now, and that was something. "Did you do it?" he asked. "The thing?" "No." "Then why did they put you in prison?" "Because everyone was frightened and there was a war on, and I was the obvious answer, and it was easier to be certain than to be right." Sirius shrugged. "Also because I was standing in the middle of the worst thing I've ever seen, laughing my head off, which, in fairness, did not look brilliant." Harry considered that with the deep and dreadful seriousness of a small child. "Why were you laughing?" "Because," said Sirius, "if I'd stopped I'd have had to start doing something else." The boy nodded slowly, and Sirius realized with a lurch that he understood. "Harry," he said, "I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to know that whatever you say, I'm not leaving you in this house." "That part isn't a question, but this bit is." He leaned forward. "There's a thing I can do. It's very old and it's a bit strange and it involves a bank. If I do it, you stop being only James and Lily's son and you also become mine. In your blood. You'd be my son, actually and legally, and nobody, not the ministry, not your aunt, not the chief warlock of the Wisengamot himself, could ever take you back off me, because it's older than all of them and there's no form to fill in to undo it." Would I stop being theirs? Said Harry instantly. My mum and dad's. Sirius shut his eyes for a second. No, he said. God, no, never. That's the whole point of the old right instead of the new one. It doesn't cut, it adds. You'd be Harry James Potterblack. You'd have both. You'd have your father's house and mine, and if you ever want to drop the black bit when you're 17, I will help you burn the paperwork myself, because between you and me, it's not a family to be proud of. But it's yours. It's mine now, Sirius agreed. It didn't used to want to be. Harry looked at the little gold light which had drifted down and was sitting on the toe of his sock like a small, warm animal. Will it hurt? He asked. Yes, said Sirius. For about 10 seconds. I'm not going to lie to you about that tonight or any other night, and I want you to remember I told you the truth about this one, because there's going to come a day when I tell you something you don't want to hear and you'll need to know I don't lie to you. Harry was quiet for a bit. Nobody ever asks me things, he said. I know I'm asking. Can I bring my soldiers? The coal turned over in Sirius's chest, hard enough that it must have showed on his face, because Harry immediately said, It's all right, I don't have to. You bring the soldiers, said Sirius, and his voice was not entirely steady. You bring the soldiers and the blanket and anything else in there you want, and then we're going to go, and on the way I'm going to buy you whatever you'd like to eat at 3 o'clock in the morning from a shop, and you can have all of it. Harry stared at him. All of it, he repeated. All of it. The boy crawled out of the cupboard on his hands and knees and stood up in the hallway of number 4 Privet Drive, holding 3 broken plastic soldiers in one fist and a blanket in the other, and he came up to somewhere below Sirius's ribs, and he was wearing pajamas with a hole in the knee that had belonged to a much larger child. Sirius knelt down and put out his hand, and Harry, after a moment, took 2 of his fingers. Halfway to the front door, Harry stopped. Should I say goodbye? Sirius looked at the stairs. No, he said. He did leave something, though. On the kitchen table, held down by the sugar bowl, a single sheet of paper on which he had written, in the beautiful copperplate his mother had beaten into him at 7 years old, He is gone. He will not be back. Do not look for him. Do not speak his name to anyone who comes asking, and someone will come asking. You have a son upstairs. Consider, for the rest of your life, how close you came tonight to losing him, and then teach him better than you taught yourself. S.O.B., Lord of the most ancient and most noble house of Black, he read it over and thought about it, and then, because he was still underneath everything, the boy who'd put a dung bomb in Snivelus's cauldron, he added, P.S. The spoons are, in fact, silver plate. Petunia's been robbed. Then he picked up his godson, who weighed almost nothing, and walked out of the house. The 4th chamber of Gringotts is below the level of the dragons, and it is not a room so much as a hollow in the rock that someone found and decided to be polite to. There is no gold in it. The walls are bare and rough. In the center of the floor there is a circular hearth of black stone 11 feet across, with a channel cut round it, and around that, worn into the rock by 900 years of standing, 411 shallow depressions where goblins put their feet. They were all full. Sirius came in carrying Harry, who had eaten, at 3:20 in the morning, from an all-night petrol station in Slough, a bag of crisps, 2 chocolate bars, a sausage roll, a carton of orange juice, a second sausage roll, and something called a curly-whirly which he had examined for some time before eating with an expression of near-religious suspicion. He'd fallen asleep in the taxi somewhere around Hounslow with the empty crisp packet still gripped in his fist, and he had not woken up since, not for the leaky cauldron, not for the alley, not for the cart, not for the 400 goblin silence of the 4th chamber. Ragnarok stood at the hearth in white. You have the child. I have my godson, said Sirius. The child's got a name. He will have another one shortly, Ragnarok gestured. Lay him on the stone. Sirius did not move. Lord Black. Give me a minute, said Sirius. He stood there in a chamber under London with 411 goblins watching him and a 6-year-old asleep against his shoulder, and he thought about James, who had laughed at him at the christening and said, You're the responsible one. Merlin help him, and about Lily, who hadn't laughed, who had looked at him very seriously over the top of the baby's head and said, Sirius, if it ever comes to it, promise me it'll be you and not a stranger. It's me, Lily, he said under his breath. Sorry I'm late. Then he laid Harry Potter down on the black stone. The rite took 40 minutes and Sirius understood perhaps a third of it. Ragnak spoke, and 400 goblins answered, and the sound they made was not language, it was more like weather. Somewhere in the middle of it, the hearth caught no wood, no spell, just a low blue fire that came up out of the stone itself and did not flicker, and the temperature of the chamber dropped rather than rose. They cut Sirius's forearm from wrist to elbow. He didn't watch. The blood went into the channel round the hearth and ran the wrong way, uphill, all the way round the circle and back to itself, and where it closed the loop the blue fire went white. "Name the child," said Ragnak. "Harry James Potter. Name his father, James Fleamont Potter. Name his mother, Lily Potter." "Nay Evans." Sirius's voice cracked. "Muggle-born and worth 6 of every purebred coward who ever spat that word at her, and if this family's magic has an opinion about that, it can take it up with me afterwards." The white fire did not so much as waver. "Name yourself." "Sirius Orion Black, Lord of the most ancient and most noble house of Black." He put his opened arm out over the hearth, over the boy, and the blood ran off his fingers and fell into the fire and did not hiss. "And I say now, before this hearth and this house and this witness, that I never betrayed James and Lily Potter, that I broke no oath sworn to them, that their blood is not on my hands, nor their deaths at my door, and any man who says otherwise is wrong, or a liar, or Peter Bloody Pettigrew. And on that and on my name and on my blood, I claim this child as my own in blood, in magic, and in law." Tauger's purr. There was a pause that seemed to last a great deal longer than it could possibly have lasted. Later, Sirius would learn that 411 goblins had watched his right hand very carefully during that pause, because 411 goblins had read the account of 1604 as part of their basic training, and there was a ceremonial bucket of sand kept just outside the door for that exact purpose, and it had been refreshed that evening. The white fire came up off the hearth in a column and went into Harry Potter's chest. The boy arched off the stone. He didn't scream. Sirius, who had promised himself he would not move, moved, got a hand under the small of Harry's back and held him and said, 10 seconds, 10 seconds, that's all it is, I've got you, I've got you." And the fire went through the child and out again, and the wound in Sirius's arm closed from elbow to wrist like a zip, and the hearth went dark. And the world was suddenly, appallingly quiet. Harry lay very still on the black stone. "Ragnak," said Sirius. "Wait." "Ragnak, wait, Lord Black." Harry's chest rose. Sirius sat down on the floor of the fourth chamber of Gringotts with a thump that echoed, and put his face in his hands, and stayed there for rather a long time while 400 goblins pretended, with immense tact, to be looking at something else. When he looked up, Harry's eyes were open. They were still green, but there was a darkness gone into them at the edges, the deep bruised violet black that had looked out of every portrait on the staircase at Grimmauld Place for 400 years, and his hair, which had been an unruly black mess, had gone properly, glossily black, the black, the kind that catches light. His face had changed by perhaps a millimeter in 3 places. It was Lily's mouth and James's jaw and something around the brow that Sirius saw in the mirror every morning. "Hello," said Sirius. Harry sat up slowly. He looked at his hands. He turned them over. He looked at the goblins and at the dark hearth, and at the man kneeling in front of him with blood dried to his elbow and tears all over his face. "It stopped hurting," he said. "Yeah, told you, 10 seconds. 11, said Harry. Sirius laughed, a real one ripped right out of him, loud enough that it came back off the ceiling. Harry looked at his own hands again. He seemed to be searching for something. Then he looked up, and his shoulders came up a little around his ears, and he said, in a very small and very careful voice, "Am I allowed breakfast?" The chamber went silent again. Ragnak, son of Ragnak, ritual master of Gringotts, who had witnessed the sacking of 2 ministries and the execution of a king, turned his head very slowly and looked at Sirius Black, and something moved across his face that no human being had ever seen there before. Sirius reached out and took his son under the arms and lifted him off the black stone and set him on his feet. "Harry," he said, "listen to me, because I'm only going to explain this once, and then it's just going to be true for the rest of your life. You don't have to ask, not for breakfast, Not for lunch, not for dinner, not for the biscuit tin, not for a bath, not for a jumper, not for the light on, not for a question, not for anything. There is no chart, there is no list. You are not earning it. He was gripping the boy's shoulders. He made himself loosen his hands. You're mine. Food comes with that. Everything comes with that. Do you understand? Harry looked at him for a long moment. No, he said honestly. That's all right, said Sirius. You will. The Daily Prophet went to press at 4:30 and the special edition at 7, and by 8 o'clock on the morning of the 22nd of November, 1986, there was not a wizarding household in Britain that had not been screamed at over the breakfast table. Black ESCAPES AZKABAN, Potter boy missing, no magical means of escape, says BAFFLED Ministry Crouch. He will be found within the week. And then at 11 o'clock, an owl arrived at the Prophet offices bearing a sealed scroll with a black wax seal, and the presses stopped, and the second special edition came out at 1, and this one was the one people kept. GRINGOTTS confirms. HEARTHBLOOD right performed Black NAMED Lord. Potter heir adopted in blood. The rite cannot be performed by a betrayer. Ritual Master Ragnarok. Ministry declines to comment in a crooked, tilting house outside Ottery St. Catchpole. A small fat rat sat on a boy's bedside table beside a half-eaten piece of toast and did not touch it. Percy Weasley had left the paper open on the bed while he went to shout at his brothers about a missing sock, and the rat had climbed onto it and had been sitting on the photograph of Sirius Black's 12-year-old Auror portrait for 11 minutes without moving. The rat's front paw was missing a toe. It read the second headline twice, then a third time. Then it climbed down off the newspaper and sat on the windowsill, looking out at the orchard, where 6 red-headed children were playing a chaotic game involving a broken broom and a great deal of shrieking, and it thought about the 4th chamber of Gringotts, and about what it meant that the family magic had said yes. It thought he'll come. It thought, he'll come here eventually because he's not stupid, he was never stupid. He'll work out where a rat goes to hide, and it's a house full of children with no one counting. And then, because Peter Pettigrew had survived 12 Death Eaters, 1 war, and 5 years of Sirius Black being alive by being the only person in every room who was properly, honestly frightened, he thought the thought he had been avoiding for 5 years. I can't beat him. I can't outrun him. There's only one thing in the world he's more afraid of than I am. I'll have to go and wake it up. The rat ate the toast after all. It was going to need its strength. Chapter 2. The oldest law of the Aurors came at 6 in the morning, which Sirius thought was a bit rude, and 11 of them which he thought was flattering. He'd been up since 4. He'd been up since 4 every day since Gringotts, because Azkaban had broken something in him about sleep, and because there had turned out to be a great deal to do. Grimmauld Place had spent 14 months with no lord in it and a house elf slowly losing his mind, and the state of the place when Sirius had walked through the front door with a sleeping child over his shoulder had been, even by the standards of a man who had recently swum out of a prison, genuinely upsetting. So he'd worked. Nights, mostly. He'd burned the curtains in the front parlor and everything living behind them. He'd taken a hammer to the elf head plaques on the stairs, which had made Creature weep. And then, when he understood why Creature was weeping, he'd sat down on the 4th step at 2 in the morning and listened to a 200-year-old elf explain the name of every single one of them, and had written all 12 names down, and had them carved into a stone in the back garden instead. Creature had not exactly forgiven him. Creature had started cooking again, and the cooking was extraordinary. And on the 4th morning, Sirius had come down to find the old elf standing on a stool at the kitchen table cutting toast into soldiers with an expression of profound and furious concentration, because the young master had eaten toast in soldiers at Privet Drive exactly once, on a Christmas morning in 1984, and had mentioned it, and Creature did not intend to be outdone by muggles. The drawing room he'd left alone. The tapestry was in there. At 6 o'clock he was in the kitchen with a cup of tea, wearing a dressing gown over trousers, when the wards went off, not a noise exactly, more a sensation, like someone leaning on your shoulder. 11, he said out loud. Creature, there are 11 ministry personnel on the front step. Creature heard, master. The elf did not look up from the eggs. Shall Creature put them in the wall? No, Creature, we've talked about the wall. Creature remembers master's instruction, said Creature, with the air of an elf writing something down for later. Nobody in the wall. Nobody in the wall. Take Harry his breakfast when he wakes up and don't let him come downstairs until I say. Sirius stood and looked at his reflection in the dark window and considered his dressing gown and decided that a dressing gown was, on balance, exactly right. And bring the tea things to the front step, all of them, the good ones. Master is going to give the ministry tea. Master is going to be photographed giving the ministry tea, said Sirius. There's a difference, and it's about 9 million galleons wide. He opened the front door of number 12, Grimmauld Place at 6:04 in the morning, in a dressing gown, holding a saucer, and said, "Morning." The 11 oars on the step had been arranged in a formation. It was a good formation. 4 in front with wands up, 3 flanking left along the railings, 2 right, 2 hanging back with what looked like a portable anti-apparition rig, and every one of them in full battle robes with the hoods down. Sirius knew the formation. He'd been taught it in 1979 by a man called Moody, and he could see, from the way the left flank was standing a foot too far forward, that whoever was running this had learned it from a book. "Sirius Black," said the woman at the front, young, jaw set, absolutely terrified and doing an excellent job of not showing it. "You are under arrest for escape from lawful custody. Drop your wand and—" "Haven't got one," she faltered. "Genuinely," said Sirius. "Look," he held up both hands, one of which had a saucer in it. "Never got a replacement. Ollivander's been shut all week. It's a whole thing." Behind him, Creature appeared in the doorway with a tray the size of a coffee table, on which were 14 cups, a teapot in the shape of a screaming basilisk, a jug, a sugar bowl, and a plate of shortbread arranged in a fan. "There are 11, said Creature accusingly, "and Master and Creature has made 14. Creature was not told how many were coming." "Nobody tells me anything either," said Sirius. The oarer's wand had dipped about 3 inches. "Mr. Black." "Lord Black, actually, and I'm not being a prick about it, it's going to be relevant in a minute. He came out onto the top step in his bare feet in November and sat down on it. What's your name?" "Or second-class Hestia Jones, and I would like you to—" "Jones, right." Sirius poured himself more tea. "Hestia is Amelia Bones awake. Head Orer Bones is, because here's how this morning goes." He said it pleasantly, and he did not raise his voice, and every single one of the 11 found themselves leaning in slightly to hear it. Option 1. "You attempt to arrest me. I don't have a wand, so I won't fight you. I'll just stand here on the property of the most ancient and most noble House of Black, on land that's held its own ward since 1213, and let you try to drag a lord of a founding house off his own step without a warrant signed by the chief warlock, which you haven't got, because Barty Crouch signed that one himself at midnight, didn't he? I can see it in your inside pocket. That's not the right color of parchment for a Wisengamot warrant, and you know it. And the wards will do what the wards do. And then I'll spend a fortnight in a ministry cell while Gringotts and the Wisengamot and a great many newspapers work out whose fault it was. And somewhere in the middle of that fortnight, a 6-year-old boy who has been out of a cupboard for 11 days will find out that men in black robes came and took his father away." Nobody said anything. "Option 2, said Sirius. "You send your fastest man to Amelia Bones, and you tell her Sirius Black is sitting on his front step in a dressing gown, and will surrender himself into her personal custody, at the ministry, at 10 o'clock this morning, on his own 2 feet, on the condition that he is brought before the full Wisengamot, and not into a broom cupboard in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. And meanwhile you 11 can come inside, because it's freezing, and Creature's made 14 cups and he will sulk for a week." Hestia Jones stared at him. "You're asking us," she said, "to have breakfast. I'm asking you to not stand in the road looking stupid when the prophet photographer gets here." Sirius jerked his chin at the corner of the square. "He's been in that doorway since 5:30. He's got a very distinctive cough." 11 heads turned. There was a scuffle and a small explosion of pigeons, and a young man in a plaid coat sprinted out of the mouth of Grimmauld Place with a camera clutched to his chest. "Do you," said Hestia Jones slowly, "have any idea how much of a nightmare you are?" "Orer Jones," said Sirius Black, "I've had 5 years to think about it, and the answer is yes." She took the tea. The photograph made the front page, and it made Barty Crouch's morning considerably worse than it already was. It showed 11 Aurors on a front step in the gray dawn light, most of them holding teacups. One of them, a large man named Proudfoot, caught mid-reach for a piece of shortbread. And on the step below them, barefoot, in a dressing gown, with his hair loose round his shoulders and his cheekbones showing like a starved wolf's, sat a man the entire country had spent 5 years being told was a monster, looking up into the camera with an expression of enormous and completely genuine amusement. Black surrenders over T underneath, in smaller type. Ministry sources confirm no warrant was issued by the Wisengamot. The Wisengamot chamber under the ministry is a pit with tiered benches round it, and Sirius had been in it exactly once before, aged 15, on a school trip he'd been thrown out of for enchanting the chief warlock's water jug. There'd been no such trip for his trial in 1981, because there had been no trial in 1981, and he thought about that as he walked in, and he let himself think about it, and he made no attempt whatsoever to keep it off his face. He had dressed for it. Black, of course. The house would have caught fire otherwise, but cut sharp and modern, no robes, a coat to the knee, and the ring on his hand where everybody could see it. Amelia Bones walked on his left, monocle glinting, radiating an aura of "I have not agreed to any of this" so powerfully that people stepped back from her. "You've got 1 hour," she said out of the side of her mouth. "After that I have to put you in a cell, and Black, I will do it, whatever the papers say." "Amelia, has anybody ever told you you're the only honest person in this building?" "Frequently. It's not a compliment, it means everyone else has given up." She stopped at the foot of the steps. "For what it's worth, if they'd let me run that arrest in 81, you'd have had a trial," I asked, twice. "I know," said Sirius. "That's why I surrendered to you." 211 wizards and witches filled the benches, and the noise when Sirius came into the pit was like a wave breaking. He didn't sit in the chair. The chair had chains on it. He stood beside it with his hands in his pockets and let them shout for a while. Bartemius Crouch Sr. rose, and the chamber went quiet the way a classroom does. He was smaller than Sirius remembered and considerably grayer, and his mustache was clipped to a millimeter, and his robes were pressed, and his hands did not shake at all. Whatever else you said about Crouch, and Sirius had said most of it loudly at various points, the man was not a coward and he was not a hypocrite. He'd fed his own son to the same machine. "This chamber," said Crouch, "is not here to relitigate a conviction." "There wasn't one," said Sirius. "You will speak when. There wasn't a conviction, Barty, there was a form." Sirius took one hand out of his pocket. "Case file 3116, Black, SO 9 lines. Committal by executive order under the Emergency Provisions Act, Section 4, Subsection 9, signed by the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, countersigned by nobody, reviewed by nobody, and never once entered in the Wisengamot's own docket. I know it's 9 lines, because I asked Gringotts to buy me a copy from a clerk on Tuesday. It cost 400 galleons. Frankly, it's the worst value I've ever had for money." The chamber erupted. Crouch waited it out. When it dropped, he said into the silence, and his voice was perfectly steady. "That order was lawful." "Yes," said Sirius. "That's the horrifying part, isn't it? It was completely lawful. You did everything right. You had a street full of dead muggles and a laughing man in the middle of it and a war on, and a country that wanted somebody in a cell by Friday. And there was a law that let you do it, so you did it. I've had 5 years to be angry with you, and about 18 months ago I ran out." He shrugged. "You weren't wicked, Barty. You were certain. There's a difference, and I'm not sure it's a big one, but there is one." "Then you concede the order was." "I concede that you built a machine that eats people without chewing," said Sirius, "and that it works exactly as designed, and that the design is the crime. But we're not here about that either." Crouch's jaw tightened fractionally. He was too disciplined to look at the gallery, but a lesser man would have. "Then let us be clear about what we are here for," he said, "since Lord Black is directing proceedings. 11 days ago you escaped custody. That is a crime, complete in itself, regardless of the original committal. 4 days ago, you removed a minor child from the residence in which the chief warlock of this body had placed him, without notice, without process, by force in the night. And you then subjected that child at the age of 6 to a ritual of blood magic so archaic that the Department of Mysteries has no living practitioner who can describe its effects. He turned slowly to the benches. The rite has been reported in the press as an exoneration. I invite this chamber to notice that it is nothing of the kind. It is a transfer of property. Sirius Black has escaped a prison and made himself the legal guardian of the most important child in Britain in the same week, and we are being asked to applaud his romanticism. That landed. Sirius could hear it land in the shuffle along the benches. Good, he thought. He's clever, thank God. I couldn't have stood it if he was stupid. Where is the boy now? Said Crouch. At home, at Grimmauld Place. In a house that the Auror office searched in 1979 and recorded 11 active dark artifacts within, of which 4 were classified Class A. Crouch let that sit. Is that where Harry Potter sleeps tonight, Lord Black? Under the roof where Bellatrix Lestrange was married. Bellatrix, said Sirius, was married at St. Wolfram's in Grantham, actually in a marquee, and it rained. But yes, he sleeps at Grimmauld Place, 3rd floor back, the room with the good window, because he likes to see the sky. And there are no dark artifacts in that house anymore because I spent 4 nights burning them, and Gringotts sent a team of curse breakers on Sunday, and I have their certificate. And Amelia, would you? Amelia Bones, without any change of expression, floated a roll of parchment into the middle of the floor. Thank you. 14 items destroyed. 9 surrendered to the department for disposal. 1 still there, which is a portrait of my mother that cannot be removed from the wall by any means known to goblin or wizard, and which I have covered with a curtain and warded shut. And if the ministry would like to send someone to have a crack at it, I will pay them and give them lunch. Somebody in the gallery laughed. Then several people did. Crouch did not. Charming, he said. Now answer this. You claim the Hearthblood rite proves your innocence. On what authority? And there it was. Sirius had been waiting for it for 2 hours, and he'd known Crouch would be the one to open the door, because Crouch could not help himself. Crouch believed in procedure the way other men believed in God, and a man who believes in procedure will always ask the question that lets you cite the statute. On the authority, said Sirius, of the Wisengamot Charter of 1236, the chamber went strange, not silent, worse than silent. There were perhaps a dozen people on those benches old enough or well-read enough to know what that meant, and Sirius watched the knowledge move through them like a crack across ice. Griselda Marchbanks going very still, old Ogden's head coming up, a shriveled little witch in the 4th row putting her hand over her mouth. And up on the chief warlock's dais, where he had sat in complete silence for 11 minutes, Albus Dumbledore closed his eyes. Explain yourself, said Crouch. The charter that founded this body, said Sirius, was a contract. 28 houses gave up the right to judge their own blood matters, feud, inheritance, adoption, oath, and handed it to a common court. In exchange, they wrote in a floor, Clause 9, no matter judged in the Hearth Law shall be rejudged in the Wand Law. The Wisengamot exists because the ancient houses lent it their authority, and there are 4 things they never lent, and one of them is the Hearthblood, because the Hearthblood can't be corrupted. You can bribe a judge, you can bribe a jury, you cannot bribe fire. He turned all the way round slowly so that he was speaking to the benches and not to Crouch. There are exactly 3 ways this ends. 1. You say the rite is a fraud, in which case you're saying Gringotts falsified a 900-year-old ritual in front of 411 witnesses, and I'd love to watch someone tell them that. I'd sell tickets. 2. You say the rite is real but it doesn't mean what it means, in which case every blood adoption, every inheritance, and every line of succession in the 28 houses is open to challenge from tomorrow morning, and this chamber will be doing nothing else until 2043. Or 3. 3, said Griselda Marchbanks from the 4th row. She sounded almost hungry. 3, said Sirius. You accept it. And the moment you accept it, you have accepted, as a matter of settled law, that I did not betray James and Lily Potter. Which means somebody else did. Which means there is a Death Eater who has been at large in Britain for 5 years, and this body put the wrong man on a rock in the North Sea without asking him a single question. And everybody in here who was on these benches in 1981 is going to have to decide what they want to say about that. The noise went up like a flock of birds. Crouch stood absolutely still in the middle of it with his hands at his sides, and Sirius watched him do the arithmetic, watched him find every exit and see it closed, and watched the exact moment when the man's face changed. Because Barty Crouch was not thinking about Sirius Black anymore. He was thinking about a review. A review of every committal under Section 4, Subsection 9. Every prisoner sent to Azkaban by executive order between 1979 and 1982. Every name on every one of those 9-line forms, including one in the autumn of 1982 that had a very interesting subsequent history involving a polyjuice potion, a deathbed, and a woman buried under her son's name. He looked up, and for 1/2 second his eyes met Sirius Black's across the pit, and Sirius, who had grown up in a house full of liars and could read a face the way other people read a headline, saw something there he had not expected at all. Oh, thought Sirius. Hello. What have you got in your cellar, Barty? This chamber, said Albus Dumbledore, will adjourn. They gave him a room off the atrium with a table and 2 chairs, and Amelia Bones stationed 2 Aurors outside it and said, 20 minutes and then I'm taking you home myself, and Black, if you apparate out of here I will hunt you across 3 counties. Amelia. What? Thank you, he said and meant it, and she went red to the ears and left. Dumbledore came in 90 seconds later. He looked older than Sirius remembered, properly old, in a way he hadn't in 1981, and he shut the door behind him with a small, tired gesture and stood with his hand still on it. Sirius, Albus, may I sit? It's a ministry chair, not my sofa. Do what you like. Dumbledore sat. He arranged his hands on the table. Sirius stayed standing on the other side of it and did not offer him anything, and the silence went on for a while. I did not visit you, said Dumbledore. No. I want to say first that this was the greatest failure of my life, and that I have no defense for it that I would be willing to say out loud to you, because every defense I have constructed in 5 years is an explanation, and you are owed an apology, and the two are not the same. He looked up. His eyes were not twinkling. Sirius had never seen them like that. I am sorry, it is not enough. I am aware that it is not enough. Sirius found, to his intense irritation, that his throat had closed. You believed it, he said. Yes. You knew me at 11. You knew what James was to me. Yes. And you never asked me a single question. No, said Dumbledore. I did not. Because I had spent a year watching the Order be betrayed from within, and I had come to believe that anyone could be turned, and when I found that I had been wrong about who, when I found the Secret Keeper had failed, I did not investigate. I concluded. He said it very evenly, like a man reading out a diagnosis. I have been called the greatest wizard of the age for 40 years, Sirius, and the chief effect of that has been to make me lazy in exactly one respect. I have stopped noticing the difference between knowing a thing and having decided it. You paid for that, you paid 5 years for it. 4,011 days. Dumbledore flinched, actually flinched. You counted. For the first 2 years, then I stopped and that was worse. Sirius pulled the chair out and sat down after all because his legs had started to go. Right, that's the apology, I'll take it. I'm not going to say it's all right because it isn't, and it never will be, and I'll be furious about it on and off for the rest of my life. But I'll take it, and I'd rather have you than not, and if you'd like to be useful, there's a war criminal living as a rat somewhere in Britain and I've got a name and no wand. Peter. I will help you find him, said Dumbledore. You have my word. Good. Now give me Harry. And there it was, no transition, no softening, dropped on the table between them like a stone, and Sirius understood that everything before it had been true and every word of it had also been preparation, and that was Albus Dumbledore in one sentence and always had been. No, said Sirius. You do not know what you have done. I've got a fair idea. You have not. Dumbledore leaned forward. Lily Potter did not die by accident, Sirius. She died in a specific way, in a specific place, refusing a specific offer, and what she did in that moment was older than anything in your family's grimoire. She put a protection on that boy that lives in his blood, and I anchored it to her sister, to her blood. So long as Harry could call the place where Petunia Evans dwells home, he could not be touched there, not by Voldemort, not by anything that carries his mark. It is the single strongest defense I have ever seen, and I did not build it. I only had the wit to nail it down. Sirius sat back. Go on, he said. There is no more to say. That is what it is. And you have taken him out of it, and worse, you have altered the blood it was keyed to. Whatever the hearthblood has done to him, it has done to Lily's protection also. It may be diminished. It may be broken. I have no way to know, because no one has performed that rite since 1604, and no one has ever performed it on a child carrying a sacrificial charm. And Voldemort's dead. Voldemort, said Dumbledore, is not dead, and I have never for one moment believed he was, and I have said so to 4 ministers of magic and been smiled at by all of them. I know. Dumbledore stopped. You know. Albus, I was in the war. Nobody who fought in that war thinks he's dead. Nobody who saw what he did to himself thinks he's dead. Sirius turned the ring on his finger. My cousin's in a cell 4 doors down from where mine was, and I heard her, every night for 5 years, telling him she was still waiting. You don't do that for a corpse. She's mad, but she's not stupid, and she was closer to him than anyone, and she has never once, not for a single night, spoken about him in the past tense. The old man was silent. So no, said Sirius. I don't disagree with you about the danger. I disagree with you about the arithmetic. And here's where, sit down, I'm not finished, here's where you and I are going to have a real problem, so let's have it now while we're being honest. He put both hands flat on the table. You put a 15-month-old baby on a doorstep in November with a letter. Sirius. With a letter, Albus. You didn't knock. You didn't go in and sit with her and look her in the eye and say, Petunia, your sister is dead and this is her son and I need you to love him. You left him on a step and you walked away because you knew, and don't insult me, you knew, that if you had a conversation with that woman she would have said no, and then you'd have had to find another answer, and you didn't have one. So you made it a fait accompli. You made it so she'd have to be a monster to refuse. Sirius's voice hadn't risen at all, and she wasn't quite a monster. She was just small and frightened and mean. So she took him in and she put him in a cupboard under the stairs and she bolted it on the outside, and he slept in there for 5 years. And he was 6 years old when I got him, and he asked me, in a room under Gringotts, with 400 goblins watching, whether he was allowed breakfast. Dumbledore's face did not move. His hands on the table closed slowly into fists. You had watchers, said Sirius. Don't tell me you didn't, I know how you work. Arabella Figg on Wisteria Walk, and I looked her up. She's a squib and she's a good woman, and I've no quarrel with her at all. She reported that he was thin and quiet. She reported it for years, and every time you decided that the wards mattered more. Yes, said Dumbledore, say it properly. Yes. The word came out of him like something torn. Yes, I knew he was unhappy. I did not know about the cupboard, and I am aware that is the sort of thing a man says when he has arranged very carefully not to know. I told myself that a difficult childhood was survivable, and that Lord Voldemort was not. I told myself that a boy who was loved too well and admired too much would come to Hogwarts insufferable and soft, and that the world he was going to be asked to walk into does not forgive softness. I told myself a great many things, Sirius, and I am 70 years too experienced to pretend I did not know I was doing it. His voice dropped. I chose the walls over the boy. I would like to tell you it was a difficult choice. It was not. It was easy, and it stayed easy for 5 years, and I think that is the part I shall have to answer for. Sirius looked at him for a long moment. That's the most honest thing you've ever said to me, he said, and it doesn't change my answer. Sirius, because it's the same choice, Albus. That's what you're not hearing. You're sitting there saying, yes, I sacrificed his childhood for his safety, and it was the right call, and now you want me to hand him back so you can do it again. And you cannot see that the second time it isn't a tragedy, it's a policy. Sirius stood up. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to help me build something better. You want blood wards. Fine. There is a woman in Tonbridge called Andromeda Tonks whose maiden name was Black, who is Harry's second cousin by adoption as of 11 days ago, who is a living blood relative in the oldest sense, and who, this is going to shock you, actually likes children. You want the Fidelius. Grimmauld Place has had a family ward on it since 1213, and I'll layer whatever you like on top, and you can be the secret keeper, because between the two of us, I trust you further on that particular subject than I trust myself. You want him prepared for a war. Good. So do I. I'll start him on Wandrick at 8 and dueling at 9, and he'll know more about dark magic by the time he's 11 than half your order, because I was raised in that house, and I know where the books are." He leaned on the table. "What you don't get," said Sirius, "is to keep him small, not for one more day. I'll give you everything else." The silence went on for a long time. "You have grown up," said Dumbledore at last, "and I find I resent it, which tells me something unflattering. Azkaban's very educational. I'd say send your son, but you haven't got one." Something crossed the old man's face at that, so quick that Sirius nearly missed it and filed away. Dumbledore rose. At the door he stopped. "Clause 9, he said. "You will invoke it in full. Trial by the oldest law, depends whether Crouch makes me. He will make you." Dumbledore's hand was on the door. "Sirius, do you know why no house has invoked that clause since 1749? Because it's unanswerable." "No," said Dumbledore. "Because it is reciprocal. Read it to the end. Then decide." And he went out. Sirius stood in the empty room for a moment. Then he laughed quietly and said to nobody, "Oh, you magnificent old snake," and went to find a library. He came home at 6 in the evening to find a werewolf in his kitchen. Remus Lupin was sitting at the long table with his hands round a mug of tea he had clearly not drunk any of, and he was thinner than Sirius, which was saying something, and grayer at the temples than a man of 26 had any right to be. Kreacher was standing on the far side of the room with his arms folded, radiating disapproval at a level visible to the naked eye. "Kreacher, let the half-breed in," Kreacher announced, "because the young master said so, and Kreacher does what the young master says, and Kreacher hopes master is pleased. Kreacher, out." Kreacher went with dignity. Remus stood up. "Sirius, how long did it take you?" said Sirius. Remus stopped. "What, after, on the 1st of November, when they told you it was me?" Sirius shut the kitchen door behind him. "How long did it take you to believe it?" Remus's face did something terrible. "About 4 hours, he said. 4 hours. I want to say it was longer. It wasn't." He was gripping the back of the chair. "Everyone in the order knew there was a spy. For 8 months. And I knew it wasn't me. And after a while, you stop looking for the truth and you start looking for the one you can survive. And Peter was nothing. Peter couldn't have. And James was dead. And you," he laughed, "it came out awful. You'd stopped telling me things. In the last year you'd stopped, and I knew why. I knew it was the werewolf packs and the ministry saying I'd been seen up north, and I understood, and I hated you for it. And when they said you'd done it, there was a part of me, Sirius, there was a part of me that was relieved. Because it meant I hadn't been shut out for nothing. It meant I'd been right that you'd turned on me first." Sirius stood very still. "Yeah," he said, "that's about what I thought. I should have visited. They wouldn't have let you. Werewolf, no wand license, no next of kin status. They'd have laughed you out of the boat office." Sirius pulled out a chair, turned it round, and sat on it backwards. "Sit down, Mooney. You're not going to. I'm going to have a row with you about it. Probably several, probably for years. And there'll be a night when I've had a drink and I say something unforgivable about it, and you'll deserve about 60% of it." Sirius rubbed his face. "But not tonight. Tonight I need you to know something, and I need you to hear it properly, because you've gone the color of a dishcloth. Ready? I did the same thing." Remus looked up. "I suspected you," said Sirius. "For 4 months in 1981 I was certain it was you. That's why I stopped telling you things. That's the actual reason, not the packs. That's just what I said to James. And it's why I talked James into switching the secret keeper to Peter. Not just because I was the obvious target, but because I wanted it somewhere I could watch, and Peter was harmless and you weren't." He held Remus's eyes. "I got them killed because I didn't trust you. You got me buried because you didn't trust me. Peter did that. That was the whole job. That was what he was for, and he did it so well that we did the rest ourselves, and I'm not going to let him have another 5 years of it. So sit down and drink your tea, and let's start again from here." Remus Lupin sat down and put both hands over his face and did not make a sound for about a minute and a half, and Sirius let him, and looked at the ceiling, and thought about how his mother had had a portrait of a man's dignity in every room, and none of it had ever been worth a damn. Then the kitchen door opened about 4 inches and a small face appeared in the gap. "Is he crying?" said Harry in a whisper that carried beautifully. "Bit. Did you shout at him?" "No." "Kreacher said you'd shout at him." "Creature is a menace and I love him," said Sirius. "Come in. Harry, this is Remus Lupin. He's the other one." Harry came all the way in. 11 days had already done something visible. He'd been fed 11 days running and it showed in his face. And Creature had somehow, from somewhere, produced clothes that fitted. And he moved through the room now without checking behind him more than twice. He stopped in front of Remus and stuck out his hand, very formally, the way Sirius had taught him on the third day when Harry had asked how you were supposed to say hello to people. "How do you do?" said Harry. Remus took his hand. He was still wiping his eyes with the other one. "Hello, Harry," he said. "I knew your mother." Harry's whole face changed. "You knew my mum?" "I did. Rather better than this one did, actually. She couldn't stand him until 6th year." Remus's voice was going, and he was fighting it and losing. "She used to correct my essays. She had this. She put a little tick in the margin when a sentence was good, and she never told anyone she did it, and I've still got some of them." "Have you got any with her writing?" "Yes." "Can I see?" "Yes," said Remus Lupin. "Yes, of course you can." And Sirius Black, who had swum the North Sea and stared down 11 oars and told Albus Dumbledore no, sat on a backwards chair in his mother's kitchen and had to look very hard at the wall for a moment. The accidental magic happened on a Tuesday, over a jug. Harry had been carrying it, one of the good ones, cut glass, one of 40-odd things in the house that Creature genuinely cared about. And he'd been carrying it because Sirius had asked him to, and because Harry had discovered that being asked to do things when it wasn't a punishment was one of the great pleasures of his new life. He'd got it about 6 feet from the table when Remus laughed at something and Harry turned to look, and his heel caught the leg of a chair. The jug went up out of his hands, turning. And Harry, 6 years old, in a house full of adults, with a lifetime of experience about exactly what happens next, did the only thing his body knew how to do, which was throw both arms over his head and go down on his knees on the flagstones with a crack. The jug stopped in midair about a foot from the floor. It hung there, revolving very slowly, full of pumpkin juice that had climbed up out of the neck and was floating in a wobbling orange sphere above it. Nobody moved. "Harry," said Sirius. I'm sorry, I'll pay for it. I haven't got any money, but I'll." "Harry, look up. I'll clean it before Creature." "Harry." The boy looked up with his arms still over his head and saw the jug. He made a small noise. The jug wobbled. Remus's wand was already out very quietly under the table, and Sirius put 2 fingers on his wrist and pushed it down. "Don't," Sirius murmured. "Let him." "Sirius, if he drops it, then he drops it. It's a jug." He got down on the floor on his knees in front of Harry, so they were eye to eye, and he did not look at the jug at all. "Did you do that?" he said. "I don't know, I didn't do anything, I know that's how it works. It comes out sideways when you're frightened." Sirius smiled at him. "Now look at me." Nobody in this house is angry, nobody's shouting. And if that jug hits the floor in the next 10 seconds, the only thing that happens is that Creature sulks and I buy him a new one. All right, nothing else happens. That's the whole list. Harry's breath was coming very fast. "Now," said Sirius, "do you want to put it down or do you want to bring it back?" Harry stared at him. "I can bring it back." "I don't know, can you?" And Harry Potter Black turned his head and looked at the jug, floating in the middle of his father's kitchen, and reached out one hand and pulled. It came. Not smoothly. It came in 3 jerks, the orange sphere of juice sloshing and reforming, and it thumped down into his palms hard enough to make him grunt, and about half a pint of pumpkin juice landed on his head and shoulders and ran down inside his collar. There was a beat of complete silence. Then Harry started to laugh. It was the first time Sirius had heard it, the actual laugh, not the careful little polite one he'd been producing for 11 days, and it was loud and stupid, and it went on for about a minute. And by the end of it, Remus was laughing too, and Creature had come in and was standing in the doorway with his mouth open, staring at the young master, dripping, sitting on the kitchen floor holding an intact jug. "Creature," said Sirius, "get a picture of that in your head and keep it." "Creature will," said the elf in a strange voice. "Creature will keep it." They went out to the garden that afternoon and Sirius put him on a broom. It was a training broom, a Comet Junior with a charm on it that wouldn't let it go higher than 8 feet, and Harry got on it and looked terrified and then went up, and the terror fell off his face like a mask coming loose. "Higher," he said. That's as high as it goes. Make it go higher. Absolutely not, said Sirius, and then, 4 minutes later, right, hold still, and took the charm off, and watched the boy climb up the November air over Islington with the wind in his hair and both hands off the handle by the 3rd minute, and thought, prongs, you should be seeing this, and found that for once the thought didn't hurt as much as it usually did. Remus stood next to him with his arms folded. Dumbledore came to me, he said, before I came here. Course he did. What did he want? He wanted me to report to him about the boy. Remus watched Harry roll the broom over sideways, entirely by accident, and shriek with delight. He was very decent about it, framed it as concern. I told him no. You should have said yes. Remus turned his head. What? Say yes. Report to him. Tell him everything, all of it, absolutely honestly. Sirius grinned, and it was not a nice grin at all. It was the one he'd worn at 15 about 11 seconds before something exploded. Because everything is good, Moony. There's nothing to hide. So every week Albus Dumbledore is going to get a full and honest report about a boy who is fed, and warm, and taught, and laughing. And it will be true, and it will be from a source he trusts, and it will slowly and completely destroy his argument from the inside. Why would I stop that? Remus stared at him for a long moment. You've become quite frightening, he said. Bit late for that, mate. I was always. No, you were reckless. That's not the same thing. Remus looked back up at the sky. Reckless was fun. The Wizengamot reconvened on the 3rd of December, and Crouch came ready. He had 2 unspeakables, a French ritual theorist, an 11-page brief, and a proposal so elegant that Sirius genuinely admired it. Not to challenge the right, but to accept the right entirely, and to argue that the Hearthblood proved only that Sirius had not broken an oath sworn to the Potters, that he had never actually sworn the Secret Keeper's oath at all, having passed it to Pettigrew, and that therefore the magic had no oath to test, and that the whole thing proved precisely nothing except that Sirius Black had never sworn anything. It was very good. It took him 50 minutes. Sirius listened to all of it with his chin on his fist. So, said Crouch at the end, the right is not exoneration. It is a technicality, and the accused has escaped from prison, and this body is being asked to reward it. He sat down. The benches muttered. It was, Sirius could feel, about 60-40 against him. Sirius stood up. Right, he said. That's the cleverest thing anyone said in this room in years, and it's completely correct, and it's completely irrelevant, and I'll tell you why in a second. But first, Chief Warlock. I'd like to put something on the record before I make my application, and I'd like the clerks to write down that I did it before and not after. Dumbledore inclined his head. On the 21st of November, said Sirius, in the 4th chamber of Gringotts, I ceded the freehold of that chamber to the Goblin Nation in perpetuity, and I stated for their record that the House of Black has held its oldest hearth at the sufferance of the Goblin Nation for 773 years. I'd like that entered here too. The uproar was immediate and enormous. Somebody actually stood up and shouted the word treason. Sirius waited pleasantly. Now, he said when it dropped enough. Under the Wizengamot Charter of 1236, Clause 9, as a lord of a founding house, I apply for trial by the oldest law. The chamber stopped like a clock. On my innocence of the murder of 12 Muggles and Peter Pettigrew and the betrayal of James and Lily Potter, I will stand at the hearth and swear and let the fire judge me. Not the ministry, not this chamber. Not a jury of frightened people who read a newspaper 5 years ago, the fire. He looked round the benches, and his voice went hard for the first time all day. Because Barty's right. The right as performed only proves I kept the oaths I swore. Fine. Then let's have one I swear now, in front of all of you, with no wiggle room in it at all, and let's see what happens to my hand. You cannot be serious, said someone. I have never in my life been anything else, and I've had 36 years of that joke, and it never gets better. He turned to the dais. Chief Warlock. Does the applicant meet the requirements of Clause 9? Dumbledore did not answer immediately. He does, he said at last. There is one further requirement. There is, said Sirius. Clause 9 is reciprocal. I read to the end, and now he turned properly all the way round to Bartemius Crouch Sr. Any lord who invokes the oldest law, said Sirius, invites the crown's officer to stand at the hearth beside him. Because in 1236 the houses didn't trust the crown any further than the crown trusted them, and they wrote it so that if the accused burns, the accuser walks free forever. But if the accused doesn't burn, then the officer who put him there has to swear to one oath that he acted in good faith, on evidence he believed, without concealment, and that he holds no other man unlawfully by the same hand. The silence in the Wisengamot chamber was total. "That last bit's not mine," Sirius added quietly. "That's 1236. They knew what they were doing. They always did the thing where they made you promise about everything else too. Terrible people, marvelous drafters." Crouch had gone entirely white. "Barty," said Sirius, and there was no triumph in it at all, which was somehow much worse. It was almost gentle. "I'm not asking you to say I'm innocent. I know you can't. I'm asking you to stand next to me and swear you had a reason, and that there's nobody else in that prison you put there the same way. That's all. If that's true, you'll be fine. You'll walk out of that hearth and I'll shake your hand and I'll never say another word about you as long as I live, and you can spend the rest of your career telling people you were the man who did it right." He waited. "Is it true?" 211 witches and wizards turned their heads and looked at Bartemius Crouch Sr., and Bartemius Crouch Sr. looked at the floor of the pit and did not answer, and the pause went on 4 seconds too long, and every single person in that chamber heard it. "Chief Warlock," said Crouch in a voice like a door closing, "I require an adjournment." "Granted," said Dumbledore very softly. 14 days. The rat had gone by then. It had left the burrow on the 23rd of November in the night, taking nothing, and Percy Weasley had cried for 2 days and Molly had put a notice in the village post office. It had crossed 9 counties in 11 days, mostly in the linings of coats and once, memorably, in a delivery of turnips. And on the 4th of December, a small gray rat with a missing toe boarded a Muggle cargo ship at Harwich that was bound for Rotterdam, and from Rotterdam a barge, and from the barge a train, and it went east, and then south, and then east again. It was very tired. It was extremely frightened. It had read, in a 2-day-old prophet fished out of a bin at the docks, the words "trial by the oldest law," and it knew what that meant, because Peter Pettigrew had spent 7 years listening to Sirius Black complain about his family's horrible antique customs and had, unlike everyone else in that dormitory, actually paid attention. There would be no acquittal to hide behind. There would be no doubt left anywhere in Britain. Within a month, there would be 100 Aurors and a free Sirius Black and a headline saying "PTTIGREW alive," and every rat in the country would be looked at twice forever. So he was going where nobody would look. He was going to a forest in Albania where something had been sitting in the dark for 5 years, growing thinner and older and more patient, waiting for a servant with hands. I was always the one who noticed things, Peter thought, curled in the dark between 2 crates, somewhere in the cold middle of Europe. That's what nobody ever understood. James was brave and Sirius was clever and Remus was good, and I was the one who noticed. And I've noticed something. Sirius Black just took the boy who lived into the blood of the oldest dark family in Britain. He's put him behind wards 1,000 years old, and he's made himself lord of 11 Wisengamot votes, and by the time that boy is 17, he'll be untouchable. My lord will want to know that, and my lord will want to know something else too. The rat's eyes glittered in the dark of the hold. He'll want to know why, on the night he tried to kill that baby, the curse came back. And I was there when he came out of the ruin. I was the first one there. I picked something up off that floor, and I've kept it for 5 years, and I've never told a living soul. Chapter 3. What the rat knows. They lit the hearth in the 4th chamber of Gringotts for the 2nd time in 382 years on the 17th of December, at 11 in the morning, with 41 members of the Wisengamot standing in a roped-off section of goblin floor, and looking as though they wished very much that they hadn't come. Sirius had thought it would feel enormous. It didn't. It felt like a Tuesday. He'd got up and eaten breakfast and let Creature fuss with his collar for 4 minutes because Creature needed to, and then he'd gone downstairs and found Harry sitting on the bottom step in pajamas with his arms round his knees. "You're not coming," Sirius said. "I know. Remus is taking you to the zoo." "I know." Harry looked up. 7 weeks out of the cupboard, and he still had that stillness in him, the watchfulness, but it had started to be aimed outwards instead of in. "Will it hurt?" 10 seconds, said Sirius. "Same as yours." 11, said Harry, and Sirius laughed and cuffed him gently round the head and went out the door with that in his pocket, and it turned out to be all he needed. Ragnarok read the words. Sirius put his right hand into the white fire up to the wrist and said them back, and they were short, and they were unpleasantly specific, because he'd sat up 2 nights with a goblin ritual clerk making sure that every single door he might have crawled out of was nailed shut. I did not betray James Potter or Lily Potter, by word, by silence, by intent, or by any act or omission of mine that I knew or believed would deliver them to Lord Voldemort or to any of his. I did not kill Peter Pettigrew. I did not kill the 12 Muggles who died in Kestrel Street on the 1st of November, 1981. Peter Pettigrew killed them, and Peter Pettigrew was the Potter's secret keeper, and Peter Pettigrew is alive. The fire went through his hand and up his arm and out again, and did nothing at all except make the hairs on his forearm stand up. 41 members of the Wizengamot made a sound. It wasn't a cheer. It was more the noise a room makes when everybody in it breathes out at once. Sirius took his hand out of the fire and looked at it front and back and flexed the fingers, and then he turned round. "Barty," he said. Bartemius Crouch Sr. came down the steps into the ring of goblins. He had dressed for it, of course he had. The man would have dressed for his own drowning, and his hands were steady and his shoulders were back, and Sirius, watching him come, felt no triumph whatsoever. It was a bit like watching a bridge fall down in slow motion. You could admire the engineering right up until it hit the water. Ragnarok read the officer's oath. Crouch put his hand in. "I acted in good faith," he said, and his voice filled the chamber. "On evidence I believed, without concealment of any fact material to the charge. Nothing happened. The fire stayed white. And I hold no other man unlawfully," said Crouch. "By the same." His hand came out of the fire before he finished the sentence. He did it fast, the way you do when you touch a pan, and there was a smell, and Crouch stood in the middle of the 4th chamber of Gringotts holding his right wrist in his left hand with 2 of his fingers gone the color of raw meat, and nobody in that room said a single word. It was not a bad burn as burns go, that was the worst part. The fire had barely started. Sirius stepped forward. "Get a healer," he said. "Do not," said Crouch, "touch me. Barty." I said the words. Crouch's voice had gone strange, not broken exactly, flattened like a man reading a list. He was looking at his own hand with an expression of profound, offended astonishment, as though it had contradicted him at a meeting. I said the words and I meant them, all 3. I know you did. I have never taken a bribe. I have never falsified a document. In 40 years I have never once. He stopped. He looked up, past Sirius, at 41 members of the Wizengamot standing in the ropes. "There is a man in my cellar," said Bartemius Crouch Sr., "and he has been there for 4 years, and his name is Bartemius Crouch." The details came out over the following week, in the Prophet, in enormous type, and Sirius read every word of it and enjoyed almost none of it. Crouch's wife, dying, had begged. They had gone to Azkaban with Polyjuice and swapped a dying woman for a dying boy, and she'd been buried under her son's name on the island, in a grave nobody visited, and the son had spent 4 years under the imperious curse in a cellar in Dorset with a house elf for a nurse. Crouch had done it himself. Crouch had cast the curse himself, every day, twice a day, for 4 years on his own child, because he could not bring himself to break his oath by letting the boy walk free, and could not bring himself to let him die on the rock. He'd have got away with it. That was the thing. Nobody had ever suspected, nobody had ever looked, and the machine would have ground on for another decade quite happily, except that a man he had buried without a trial had come back and asked him, in front of the family magic, to swear he wasn't doing it again. They took the son. They took the elf, which Sirius thought was obscene and said so loudly in print. And on the 28th of December, Bartemius Crouch Sr. resigned every office he held, in a letter of 11 lines that did not contain the word sorry, and went home to Dorset and shut the door. Sirius went to see him in March. He didn't tell anyone he was going, including Remus, especially Remus. The house was cold. Crouch answered his own door, which was somehow the saddest thing in it, and stood there in a cardigan with his 2 ruined fingers curled against his palm. "Come to gloat. Come to offer you a job." That got him inside, at least. They sat in a front room with dust sheets still on two of the chairs, and Crouch did not offer tea and Sirius did not ask for any. "There are 411 people in Azkaban," Sirius said, "and Amelia's opening the Section 4 files, and she's going to be at it for 3 years, and she is going to make a hash of it, because she's an Auror and it's a paperwork job and she'd rather chew off her own foot. She needs someone who knows every form in that building and doesn't care who he offends." Crouch stared at him. "You are asking me. I'm asking the only man in Britain who can find a 9-line committal from 1980 in under a minute," said Sirius. "You built the machine. You know where the bodies are because you filed most of them. Come and take it apart. I would be a laughing stock. You're a laughing stock now. This way you'd be a useful one." Sirius leaned forward. "Barty, listen. I don't forgive you. I want to be clear about that. I'm not here doing a reconciliation. I've thought about it and I don't think I'm capable of it. But there are men on that island who are exactly as innocent as I was, and they haven't got a Gringotts vault or a photogenic godson, and they are going to die there in the dark, and you and I are the only 2 people in this country who genuinely cannot sleep about it." He stood up. "So, 60 galleons a week and a desk with no window, which I'm told is your natural habitat." Crouch didn't answer. He took the job in April. He worked at it, badly at first and then with terrible efficiency, for the next 4 years, and he never once thanked Sirius, and he never once looked him in the eye, and by 1990 he had got 109 people out of Azkaban. 19 of them were innocent. The papers only ever wrote about those 19. Crouch, characteristically, kept a list of all 109 in order in his own hand, and when he died he left it to Amelia Bones with no note attached. Harry Potter Black turned 7 in July, and Sirius, who had spent 5 years in a stone box learning exactly how much a person can want a specific thing, went slightly insane about it. There were 11 people at the party, which was 10 more than Harry had ever had, and they were Remus, Andromeda, Ted, Nymphadora Tonks, 14 and violently pink-haired and appalled to have been invited to a child's party, and who then spent 5 hours turning her nose into a duck's bill on request until she got hiccups, Creature, who refused to sit down, Hestia Jones, who developed the habit of coming round for tea and pretending it was official, Amelia Bones and her niece Susan, who was Harry's age and shy and hid behind a chair for the first 40 minutes and then had to be physically removed from the garden at 9 o'clock, Ragnock, who came for 11 minutes, ate a sandwich standing up, gave the boy a knife, and left, and Albus Dumbledore, who came for 2 hours, played an extremely competent game of Exploding Snap, and gave Harry a photograph album. It had 31 pictures of James and Lily in it. Dumbledore had spent 7 months writing to people to collect them. Sirius found him in the hall afterwards, putting on his cloak. "That was a good gift," Sirius said. "That was a better gift than mine, and mine was a broom. It was a self-interested gift." "Yeah, I know, doesn't stop it being good." Sirius scratched the back of his neck. "Remus's reports are extremely thorough and extremely honest. And I have read every one of them, and I am aware of precisely what you are doing to me with them." Dumbledore's mouth twitched. The photograph of the boy asleep on the kitchen table with his face in a charms primer was a low blow, Sirius. "That one wasn't staged." "I know," said Dumbledore. "That is why it worked." He put his hat on. At the door he paused. "Andromeda is a blood relative," he said. "She has stood at that hearth as a witness. If she were to accept him into her home for 1 month of every year, formally, with intent, as kin, I believe I could anchor something to it. Not what Lily made. A shadow of it, but a great deal better than nothing." Sirius went very still. "You do that." "I would have to be invited," said Dumbledore mildly, "which is rather the point of the exercise and which is why I have spent 8 months not asking. Albus, you're an absolute nightmare of a man and I'm extremely glad you're on my side," said Sirius. "Come at the weekend. Bring the good chalk." The years did what years do. At 8, Harry got a wand. Sirius took him to Ollivander's on a wet Tuesday and watched him go through 26 of them before an 11-inch holly with a phoenix feather core lit up the whole shop, and watched Ollivander go pale and start to say something about brother wands, and watched, with enormous private satisfaction, his son turn round and say, "Sorry, do you mind if we do the frightening bit later? My dad's parked on a double yellow." At 8 he learned to shield, and to disarm, and to conjure a light, and to fall properly, and he learned the last one from Tonks, who was by then 16 and in the middle of oral applications, and who knocked him flat on the lawn at Tonbridge 40 times in an afternoon, and then bought him chips. At 9 he could hold a shield charm against Remus for 9 seconds, which Remus insisted on writing down, and all the way through it in the background, quietly, the hunt. Sirius kept a room for it. Second floor back, the one that had been his mother's sewing room, and he'd stripped it to the boards and put up a map of Britain and a map of Europe and a great deal of string. There was a standing bounty at Gringotts, 11,000 galleons for information leading to the capture of Peter Pettigrew, alive, and Ragnarok had circulated it to every goblin bank on the continent because Ragnarok had developed an interest. There were 41 contacts on Remus's list, most of them werewolves, most of them people who owed Remus nothing and helped anyway because Remus was Remus. There were 3 separate favors called in from the Department of Magical Transportation. In 4 years they got 2 confirmed sightings, both of them old, both of them east. Albania, Sirius said, in the summer of 1989 with his finger on the map. Twice. And he's not a traveler, Mooney. Peter's got the constitution of a wet flannel. He doesn't go to Albania for the weather. You think he's found something. I think he's found someone, and I think I know who, and I think you and I are going to have a very serious conversation with Dumbledore that neither of us will enjoy. Sirius pulled the string tight and pinned it. He'll come back. That's the thing about Peter. He always comes back to where the food is. Lucius Malfoy made his move on the 11th of October, 1990, and he made it beautifully. He didn't attack the Hearthblood. Nobody attacked the Hearthblood anymore. It had been 4 years and it had become, in that peculiar way British wizarding society had, simply a fact, like the night bus. He didn't attack the exoneration. He didn't even attack Sirius directly. He rose in the Wisengamot on a Thursday afternoon during a debate about cauldron thickness, and he tabled a motion for the statutory review of guardianship in cases of prolonged Dementor exposure. It ran to 4 pages. It named nobody. It observed, in language of exquisite regret, that the ministry had in recent years released a considerable number of persons from Azkaban, several of them into positions of responsibility, and that the medical literature on long-term Dementor exposure was thin, and that the Department of Mysteries itself had published a paper in 1971, noting persistent affective flattening and impaired risk assessment in survivors of terms exceeding 3 years, and that surely, where the guardianship of a minor was concerned, the Wisengamot owed that child the small courtesy of a mind healer's assessment, every 3 years. Conducted by a panel, reporting to a committee Lucius Malfoy would chair, since he had gone to the trouble of tabling the motion. Sirius listened to the whole thing with his chin on his hand and his eyes half shut, and by the end of it he was smiling, and about a dozen people on the benches who knew him saw the smile and started, quietly, to enjoy themselves. "Lord Malfoy," he said when he was recognized, "that was terrific, genuinely. Who wrote it?" "I did." "No, you didn't. You can't spell effective with an A. I've seen your correspondence." A ripple of laughter. "It's a good motion, though. It's a really good motion. It doesn't say my name once and everyone in this room knows it's about me. And if I object to it, I look like a lunatic who's frightened of healers. And if I don't object to it, then in 11 months' time, there's a panel of your friends writing reports about my mental health and forwarding them to a committee you chair. That's proper work, that is. Somebody in your house has talent. If Lord Black has an objection, I haven't got an objection, I've got a question." Sirius stood up. "Actually, I've got 3 and they're all about money, so everyone stay awake." He came down into the middle of the floor, which you weren't supposed to do, and nobody stopped him, which was rather the story of the previous 4 years. Question 1. Narcissa Black married into your house in 1978, and she brought a dowry, and under Black family contract that dowry is held, not given. It sits in a Gringotts trust. It's administered by the House of Black, and it reverts to the house on the death of the Lord's kinswoman or on breach of the marriage articles by the husband's line. Article 11 of that contract requires the husband's house to maintain, and I'm quoting, "unbroken good faith and no action at law against the wife's house." He paused. "Lord Malfoy, do you know how much of Malfoy Manor is currently mortgaged against a trust I control?" The chamber had gone very quiet, "61%, said Sirius. "I looked it up on Tuesday. It took a goblin 4 minutes." Lucius did not move a muscle. Credit where it was due, the man's face didn't so much as flicker. Question 2. You hold 4 Wisengamot proxies. 2 are yours, one's not, and 1 is the black proxy for the seat of Berk, which was granted to you in writing by Walburga Black in 1979, and which you have voted, by my count, 148 times. Sirius turned to the clerks. Would the clerks like to tell the chamber the date on which a proxy granted by a member of a house, rather than by its lord, expires? The head clerk cleared his throat. On the death of the grantor, Lord Black, and Walburga Black died in 1985. Then the proxy expired in 1985. So Lord Malfoy, said Sirius pleasantly, has cast 148 votes he wasn't entitled to, which is not a crime because nobody checked. And I want to be very clear that I'm not accusing him of anything. And I want to be equally clear that the Charmed Beasts levy of 1987 passed by 2. The noise took a while to die. Question 3, said Sirius over it. Draco. And that was where Lucius Malfoy finally moved. It was very small, his hand closed on the rail in front of him, and Sirius saw it, and so did everybody else, and Sirius felt a brief, ugly satisfaction and then, immediately afterwards, felt slightly ill about himself. He'd rehearsed the next bit. He'd rehearsed it in the kitchen at 3 in the morning with Remus watching him, and Remus had said don't, and Sirius had said I have to have it loaded, and Remus had said that's what everyone says. Sirius looked up at the benches, at 200 faces, and then at Lucius, and he thought about a boy of 6 with a bolt on the outside of his door. Question 3, he said, is withdrawn. There was a rustle of surprise, because the boy's 10 and he's not a bargaining chip, and I'm not going to be the man who stands in this chamber and makes him one. Sirius put his hands in his pockets. You'd have done it. That's not a boast. It's arithmetic. If you'd found a clause with Harry's name in it, you'd have read it out on a Thursday afternoon and gone home to lunch. But I've been Lord Black for 4 years, and I've noticed something about this job, which is that the family magic doesn't actually care what you inherit. It cares what you use. And there's about 9 things in my grimoire I've decided I'm never going to use, and one of them's children, and that's going to make me worse at this than my grandfather was, and I've decided I can live with it. He turned to the chief warlock. Motion's fine by me. Assess away. Send your healers, all of them. I'll put the kettle on. But I'd like it on the record that I'm submitting voluntarily, and I'd like the panel appointed by the head of St. Mungo's and not by a committee, and I'd like Lord Malfoy to explain to this chamber before we vote why a man with 61% of his house mortgaged to me is so anxious about my judgment. The motion failed by 91 votes. Afterwards, in the corridor, Narcissa Malfoy stepped out of a doorway and stood in front of him. Sirius hadn't spoken to her in 14 years. She looked exactly like Bellatrix around the eyes and nothing at all like her anywhere else, and she was holding her gloves in both hands very tightly. You could have said it, she said. Yeah. Why didn't you? Because he's 10, said Sirius. Narcissa looked at him for a long moment. My sister writes to me, she said, from Azkaban, 4 times a year. They allow it because the warden is a snob and she is the last woman in Britain who signs herself of the House of Black. Her chin came up. I have never answered, but I read them, cousin, and I am going to tell you something for nothing, and then you and I are never going to have spoken. Go on. For 2 years she wrote about killing you, said Narcissa. In detail. It was very tedious. And then 18 months ago she stopped. She pulled her gloves on, finger by finger. Now she writes about procedure. She asks about the family articles. She asks which rites require the Lord's presence and which require only his blood. She asked me in March to find out whether a daughter of the house may petition the hearth on her own behalf and whether the Lord may refuse. Sirius felt the corridor go cold. And can he said, refuse? I don't know, said Narcissa Malfoy. Neither does she, that is why she is still asking. She walked past him and stopped and did not turn round. She is not trying to get out of Azkaban, Sirius. She has never once mentioned it. Whatever she wants, she believes she can do it from inside a cell, and she has been 3 years about it, and she is not stupid. Sissy. We haven't spoken, said Narcissa and went. The thing about Harry at 9.5 was that he'd stopped being managed. Sirius noticed the exact moment. It was the Saturday after the Malfoy vote, and they were in the kitchen, and Harry was reading the prophet upside down across the table the way he'd taught himself to do, and he said, without looking up, "He'll come at me next." "Who will?" "Malfoy." Harry turned the page. "You made him look stupid in front of 200 people, and he can't get at you because of the money, so he'll go round." "That's what I do." Sirius put down his coffee. "That's what you do." "Well, I wouldn't because it's obvious, but that's what he'll do." Harry finally looked up, and his eyes, the green ones with the black dark bleeding in at the edges, were entirely serious. "There's a thing at the ministry in November, the Yule reception. You said we're going." "We are. His son'll be there, probably." "Right," said Harry. "So here's what I want to do, and I want you to not say no straight away because you always say no straight away and then say yes on Thursday, and it wastes 3 days." Sirius sat back and folded his arms and did not say anything at all, which he had learned was the single most effective parenting technique ever devised. "Everyone thinks I'm a prisoner," Harry said. "That's the thing, isn't it? That's the whole story they tell. Sirius Black stole the Potter boy and keeps him in the dark house and nobody's seen him. And Malfoy'll use that, and he'll be right, sort of, because nobody has seen me. So I want to go, and I want to talk to people, loads of people on my own without you standing there. And I especially want to be seen talking to Draco Malfoy, because if I'm nice to his son in front of 40 photographers, then every single thing his father says about you for the next year sounds mad. You're 9. Nearly 10. Harry, that's your describing being used, by me, as a political instrument. That's the actual definition of the thing I've spent 4 years telling Dumbledore I won't do." "Yeah, but you're not doing it," said Harry. "I am." And there it was. Sirius opened his mouth and found there was absolutely nothing in it. "It's my name too," Harry said more quietly. "You keep saying that. You said it when the vault thing happened, and you said it when Rita Skeeter wrote that thing about my mum. You said it's your name, Harry, you get a say, so I'm saying." He shrugged, and for a second he was 6 again and bracing. "And if you tell me no, I'll do what you say, obviously, because you're you. But I'd like it if you didn't." Sirius looked at him for a long moment. Then he got up and went round the table and kissed the top of his son's head, which Harry endured with the profound dignity of a 9-year-old in the presence of a witness, the witness being Creature, who was pretending to descale a kettle. "Right," said Sirius. "Then we'd better teach you how to talk to a photographer." He was extraordinary at it. That was the thing nobody had expected, least of all Sirius. The Yule reception at the ministry was 400 people in a room designed for 200, and Harry Potter Black walked into it in dark blue robes with his hair flattened by Creature against its will, and did not hold anyone's hand, and within 11 minutes he had a circle round him 3 deep. He didn't perform. That was the trick of it. He answered questions like a person. Asked what it was like living with Sirius Black, he thought about it and said, loud, and got a laugh, and then said, "He gets up at 4, every day. He doesn't wake me up, he's always already there when I come down. I don't know when he sleeps." And something went round that room that no press release in the world could have bought. And at 9:30, with the prophet's photographer 11 feet away, he crossed the floor to where a pale, sharp-faced boy was standing on his own by the ice sculpture, with an expression of enormous boredom badly covering enormous misery, and stuck out his hand. "Hello, I'm Harry." Draco Malfoy looked at the hand as if it might be a trick. "I know who you are." "Yeah, everyone does, it's very boring." Harry didn't move his hand. "You're Draco. You're the only other person here who's under 30, and I've been talking to adults for 2 hours, and I'd genuinely rather be dead. Do you fly?" Draco's eyes flicked once to the photographer. He was 10, and he was his father's son, and Sirius, watching from across the room with a glass of wine he wasn't drinking, saw the exact moment the boy understood he was being used, and the exact moment afterwards when he decided he didn't care. "Nimbus 1700, said Draco. "Comet 260. It's rubbish, it's my old one, I'm getting a proper one when I'm 11. Harry finally dropped the hand, unoffended. "Right, well, there's a table of those little sausage things behind the pillar and nobody's found it yet." They were behind the pillar for 40 minutes. The photograph, 2 boys, one dark, one white blonde, both of them laughing with their mouths full, ran on page 1 under the headline The Next Generation, and Lucius Malfoy's carefully seated story about the isolation of the Potter heir died so comprehensively that his own paid columnist quietly rewrote it into a piece about reconciliation. In the carriage home, Harry fell asleep against Sirius's shoulder somewhere around Charing Cross. "He's not like his dad," he mumbled, mostly asleep. "He's just doing an impression of him. He's not very good at it." "No," said Sirius, "he isn't." "Can he come to mine?" Sirius looked out of the window at the rain and thought about Lucius Malfoy's face, and about what he'd nearly said in the Wizengamot, and about the fact that his son had just gone and done, in 40 minutes with a plate of sausages, something far more devastating than anything in the Black family grimoire. "Ask him," he said. "We'll see what happens." Peter Pettigrew came back to Britain on the 14th of April, 1991, and he came back with a plan, and the plan was very nearly good enough. He'd worked out 4 years earlier that he could not touch Harry Potter at Grimmauld Place. The wards there were 12-13 and goblin reinforced and Fedelius layered on top, and Peter had watched the house for 11 nights from a drain in 1988 and had come away with a nosebleed just from looking too hard at the door. He'd worked out that he could not touch him at Hogwarts when he got there, because Hogwarts was Dumbledore. But there was a cottage in Tonbridge, on the edge of a Muggle village, belonging to a healer and a Muggle-born solicitor, where the Potter boy stayed for 4 weeks every summer and 1 week every Easter, and where the wards were good, Dumbledore's own, blood-anchored, formidable, and where the wards, crucially, had been built to keep out Voldemort and those who carry his mark. Peter had the mark. Peter had spent 2 months in a cellar in Albania having a very frightening conversation about exactly that problem, and he had come out of it with a strip of his own skin cut away between wrist and elbow, and the mark with it, and a wound that had never properly closed and never would. He walked through Andromeda Tonks's front gate on a Sunday evening in April, and nothing happened at all. What happened next happened in about 90 seconds, and Sirius spent the rest of his life going over it. He was in the kitchen with Ted, arguing about football, of which Sirius understood nothing and had opinions about anyway. Andromeda was upstairs. Tonks, 19 now, second-year Auror, home for the weekend with her hair the color of a traffic cone, was in the garden with Harry, teaching him, for the 11th time, how to fall. Sirius heard her shout. He was through the back door before the shout finished, and what he saw was this: Ted's greenhouse in pieces, glass everywhere, Tonks on one knee with blood coming out of her hair and her wand up and steady. A small, balding, gray-faced man in a filthy traveling cloak standing 4 feet from Harry with one hand knotted in the boy's collar and a silver knife in the other. And Harry, 9 years old, absolutely white, with his own wand out and pointed and his arm shaking. "Peter," said Sirius. "Don't." Pettigrew's voice came out in a squeak and then found itself. "Don't, Sirius, don't. I'll cut him. You know I will, you know I will." "I know you will," Sirius agreed. He'd stopped dead. He had no wand in his hand. He had not gone for it, because at 4 feet with a knife already at the boy's throat, there was no spell in the world fast enough. And every single one of the 4 years he had spent in a room upstairs with maps and string collapsed down into that one arithmetic fact, and Sirius Black felt something in him go absolutely, glacially calm. "Peter, look at me." Not at him, at me. He put his empty hands out. "There's a thing you want or you'd have cut him already and run, so say it." "Blood," said Pettigrew. "Take mine." "It has to be his." Peter was crying. He'd been crying the whole time, Sirius realized. His face was wet and his nose was running and his hand on the knife was jumping like a fish. "It has to be his. It has to be the enemy's. I'm sorry, Sirius. I'm so sorry. You don't know what he's like now. You don't know what he does." "Dora," said Sirius without turning his head. "Down." Tonks flattened. Sirius did not use a wand. He had not used one, for anything that mattered, in 5 years. There had been 11 days in November 1986 when he hadn't owned one, and he'd found, in those 11 days, that the ring on his finger and 400 years of accumulated family magic did not particularly require the intermediate step. The ground opened under Peter Pettigrew's feet. It wasn't a spell so much as an instruction. 2 feet of Kentish soil simply stopped being solid, and Peter dropped to the knee, and the hand with the knife came away from Harry's throat for a quarter of a second as he flailed. And Harry, who had been knocked flat on that lawn 40 times in an afternoon by an Auror who thought falling was more important than dueling, did not try a spell. He dropped. Straight down, dead weight, out of the collar of his own jumper and rolled left. The knife came down anyway and opened his forearm from elbow to wrist. Then Sirius hit Peter Pettigrew. It was not a duel. There was nothing in it a spectator could have followed. There was a noise like a door slamming inside a mountain, and Peter went off his feet and threw what was left of the greenhouse and 40 feet down the garden into the fence. And the fence came apart, and Sirius was on him before he stopped moving. And he got a handful of the man's throat and lifted him off the ground one-handed, and every window in the back of the house blew out at once. 5 years, said Sirius. Peter's feet kicked. 5 years. 4,011 days, Peter, and I had your face in my head for every one of them, Dad. And I used to lie there and work out what I'd say, and I never got past the first bit. Dad. Sirius stopped. Harry was standing 8 feet away, holding his own arm, and the blood was going through his fingers and dripping off his elbow onto Andromeda's lawn, and he was looking not at Peter but at Sirius, and his face was frightened, and it was not frightened of the man on the ground. Don't, said Harry. Harry. I know you want to. Harry's voice cracked in the middle. I know, but if you do it here they'll say things, they'll say you're, and I don't want you to be the man who. He stopped and swallowed and started again, and he was 9 years old and bleeding, and Sirius would think about the next sentence for the rest of his life. You said the family magic doesn't care what you inherit. You said it cares what you use. Sirius stood in the wreck of his cousin's garden with a murderer's throat in his hand. Then he put Peter Pettigrew down on the grass and stunned him, and bound him, in complete silence, with 11 separate bindings, and turned him over with his foot and knelt on him, and pulled up his left sleeve. Where the dark mark should have been there was a long strip of glossy scar with no skin over it, red and wet-looking, 4 years old and unhealed. Oh, said Sirius softly. Oh, you clever little rat. And then he saw the other thing, a small glass vial on a leather cord round Peter's neck, stoppered with an inch of red in the bottom, and it was warm, and it was empty of the thing it had briefly held, because there was a residue of portkey magic on the cork, so fresh it was still stinging the air. He'd sent it. In the 90 seconds, he'd got what he came for and sent it on before Sirius's hand had even closed on his throat, because Peter Pettigrew was and had always been the one who noticed things and planned for losing. Dora, said Sirius, get the Aurors, all of them, and a healer. Ted's down. Ted Tonks was lying in the kitchen doorway with a piece of greenhouse frame through his shoulder and 2 ribs broken. And he lived. And he was in St. Mungo's for 6 weeks. And Andromeda did not speak to Sirius for 4 days, and then came round to Grimmauld Place at midnight and cried in his kitchen for an hour and then went home. The healer in the Janus Thickey ward on the 4th floor of St. Mungo's was called Ptolemy Vance, and he was 60, and he was the best diagnostician in Britain, and he had a bedside manner like a bag of spanners. Arm's fine, he said, coming out of the curtain bay. 11 stitches worth of dark residue on the blade. I've flushed it. It'll scar and he'll be insufferable about it at school. Bones sound. Nerves intact. Good. Sirius was on his feet. So what's the face for? What face? Ptolemy, I've been staring at people through bars for 5 years. I read faces professionally. What's the face for? Vance looked at him. Then he took Sirius by the elbow and walked him 20 feet down the corridor, away from the curtain, and lowered his voice. I ran a full diagnostic, he said. Standard, after a dark-edged blade, I mapped the whole body, look for spread. Took 11 minutes. He held up a roll of parchment. The arm's clean. Everything's clean. Everything in that boy is textbook healthy, and I'd like to say so to whoever's been feeding him, because at 6 he'd have been a case study. But the scar, said Vance. The corridor was very quiet. Somewhere a trolley went past. It reads as a person, said Vance. Sirius did not say anything. I've done this for 31 years. A curse scar reads as damage, as an event, a wound with a signature on it, and it sits still. This doesn't sit still. It's got a pulse, not his pulse. The healer's hands, Sirius noticed, were not entirely steady. It has magical presence, Lord Black. Discreet presence. Bounded. Something in my diagnostic charm is looking at that scar and counting too, and I have run it 4 times and changed my wand and had a colleague run it blind without telling her what she was looking at, and she asked me why I'd put 2 patients in one bay. Is it hurting him? No, so far as I can tell it's dormant and has been for 9 years, and it does not appear to be growing. Vance rolled the parchment up. I don't know what it is. I want to be extremely clear about that. I've written to nobody and I'll write to nobody. But I've read a great deal of very old, very unpleasant literature in my time, and there are perhaps 3 things in it that leave a reading like this, and 2 of them are impossible in a living host. And the third. The third, said Ptolemy Vance, isn't in the literature anymore. They took it out in 1622. Sirius stood in the corridor of St. Mungo's for a long time after the healer had gone. Through the gap in the curtains he could see Harry, sitting up in the bed with his bandaged arm held out stiffly, arguing with Tonks about whether 19 was too old for chocolate frogs, and losing and laughing. 9 years, Sirius thought. He's had it in his head for 9 years. It was there in Gringotts. It was there under the cupboard door. It was there when he asked me if he was allowed breakfast, and I brought it into my house, and I put it in a bedroom on the 3rd floor with a good window, and I never once looked. He went back in and sat down on the end of the bed and said, "Right, who wants chips?" and was, by every account, completely normal for the rest of the evening. The letter came 4 days later at breakfast, delivered by an official ministry owl with a black band on its leg, which meant Azkaban. Sirius read it twice. To the Lord of the most ancient and most noble house of Black, greetings from his most loyal daughter. Cousin, I have been very patient. I want you to know that. 3 years and never once did I write to you, though they gave me the parchment, because there was no point speaking before the words were ready. The words are ready. I, Bellatrix, daughter of Cygnus of the blood of the house, do petition the hearth. I claim the right of kinstrife under the 11th article, which is my right by birth, and which no lord may refuse, for it was written by those who knew that a house which cannot judge its own is not a house at all. You will have to come and get me, Sirius. You will have to bring me to the fire. Those are the terms and you may look them up, and I know you will because you always were a swat underneath it. Bring the boy. The article says the house must witness and he is the house now, isn't he? You made him so. That was clever. I laughed for a week. I have so been looking forward to meeting him. Towger's per B. Sirius set the letter down on the table beside his coffee. Then he got up and went into the drawing room and pulled the dust sheet off the tapestry for the first time in 4.5 years, and stood in front of it looking at a small scorched hole where his own name used to be, and at the name 3 feet to the right of it, still perfectly, beautifully embroidered in gold thread. "All right, Bella," he said. "Let's see what you've built." Chapter 4. Blood Calls Blood. The 11th article of the Black Family Compact ran to 400 words in Norman French, and Sirius spent 2 days with it and a goblin translator before he understood what his cousin had actually done. "It's not a duel," he said on the second night, throwing the parchment down on the kitchen table. "That's what I assumed. I assumed she wanted her hands round my throat one last time and I was going to say yes, frankly, and enjoy it. But it isn't." Remus turned the translation round. "It's an audit." Sirius dropped into a chair. "Kinstrife, Article 11. Any member of the house may accuse the Lord before the hearth of squandering, misusing, or corrupting the inheritance, and the hearth judges, not the accusation. That's the clever bit. The hearth doesn't care whether she's right. It judges whether the Lord's stewardship is sound. If the fire finds against me, the lordship passes. To her, to the eldest of the blood who stands unaccused at the hearth." Sirius rubbed his face. "Which, given Andromeda's disowned and Sissy married out and I'm the one on trial, is Bellatrix Lestrange, of the House of Black, who would then hold the ring, the vaults, the wards, the 11 Wisengamot seats, and the hearthblood." Remus went still. "And Harry," he said, "and Harry, because the hearthblood ties him to the house, Mooney, not to me. That's what makes it unbreakable. That's the whole point. That's why nobody can take him off me." Sirius laughed, and it wasn't a good laugh. "I built the thing that can't be undone, and I never once asked what happens if somebody takes the house. Then refuse. Can't. It says no lord may refuse, and it means it. If I refuse, she's proved the case. The fire finds against me by default, and she gets it anyway. That's what she's been doing for 3 years. She's been reading." He tipped his chair back and stared at the ceiling. 15 years in a cell with no books, Remus, and she's found the one door in 900 years of Black family law that only opens from the inside. There has to be a defense. There is. It's very simple. Sirius let the chair down. I have to stand at that hearth and let the fire look at everything I've done with this house since 1986, and it has to come back sound. Every galleon, every vote, every decision, every child. That's Sirius, that's fine. You've done nothing but good with it. Yeah, said Sirius. That's what frightens me, because she knows that too, and she's not an idiot, and she wouldn't have spent 3 years on this if she thought she was going to lose. He told Harry the next morning, all of it, because he'd made a rule in 1986 about not lying, and it turned out that the rule had teeth. Harry listened with his elbows on the table and his bandaged arm laid out in front of him like an exhibit. He was 10 and a half and there was a Hogwarts letter due in 3 weeks that everybody in the house was pretending not to think about. So she wants the family, Harry said. She wants the family, not to escape, apparently not. Then it's not about the family, said Harry, it's about what the family's got. Sirius put his cup down slowly. Say that again. Well, you always say the house isn't money, it's access. Harry shrugged. Vaults nobody else can open. Houses nobody else can find. That place in the sea you won't take me to. The Isle of Chains. That one. You said it's got the oldest library in Britain in it and half the books are chained down for a reason. Harry looked up. So what if she doesn't want to be Lord Black? What if she just wants one thing that's in a black vault and being Lord Black is how you get it? There was a long silence in the kitchen. Creature, said Sirius. The elf appeared with a crack. Creature, in the last 3 years, has anybody written to the family vaults? Any inquiry, any request, anything from Azkaban or Malfoy Manor or anywhere at all, asking what's in them? No, master, Creature's ears drooped. But Mistress Bellatrix does not need to ask Creature. Mistress Bellatrix has her own vault. He wrung his hands. 7-Eleven. She put a thing in it in the war, and she made Creature's cousin swear on his life not to speak of it, and he did not, and then she crucioed him for 4 hours anyway to be certain, and he died of it in 1980. Sirius stood up so fast his chair went over. She put something in. Yes, master. So she doesn't want to take something out of my vaults. He was already moving. She wants to be able to reach hers. Which she can't, can she, Creature? She's a convicted prisoner. Gringotts sealed every Death Eater vault in 1982, and only 2 things in the world can break that seal: a ministry warrant or the lord of her house, said Remus from the doorway. Gringotts said no for 4 days, and then Ragnarok said yes, on the condition that Sirius came alone at night and signed a waiver in a language he couldn't read. Vault 711 was down past the dragon, in the old deep, and it took 2 Cursebreakers 11 hours to get through the seal without triggering the thing Bellatrix had left on the door. Inside there was gold, a great deal of it, heaped and stacked and untouched for 9 years, and armor, and a stack of framed portraits face down, and on a high shelf at the back on its own, a small golden cup with 2 handles and a badger chased into the side. The Cursebreaker's probe hit it and shrieked. She dropped the probe. Ragnarok, 4 feet behind her, said something in gobbledygook that Sirius did not need translated. It reads as a person, said the Cursebreaker, backing up. Bounded presence, discreet. It's Lord Black. There's somebody in the cup. Sirius did not move for about 4 seconds. Then he said very quietly, Ptolemy Vance said the exact same words to me in a corridor at St. Mungo's 11 days ago about a scar on my son's forehead, and sat down on the floor of the vault and put his head in his hands, and understood the whole shape of it at once, the way you understand a picture when someone turns it the right way up. Dumbledore came at midnight and stayed until 4, and by the end of it there were 4 people in the Grimmauld Place kitchen who knew the word, and one of them had gone white to the lips. I have suspected for 10 years, Dumbledore said. I have had no proof, and I have had no second object to compare against, and a suspicion of this kind is not a thing one shares. It is a thing one verifies, and I could not verify it, and so I said nothing, and I placed a boy on a doorstep and told myself the walls would hold until I knew more. He looked at his hands. You may add it to the account, Sirius. It is a long account, and I have stopped arguing with it. How many? Said Sirius. That is the question I have been unable to answer for a decade. Now I think I can. Dumbledore's voice was flat with exhaustion. 2 objects entrusted to 2 lieutenants. He would not have made 2. He is a man in love with arithmetic, and there is one number he has been reaching for since he was 16 years old, and it is 7. 7, said Remus. 6 and the self. 6 pieces hidden and the 7th in his body, which is why he did not die in Godric's Hollow, and why he cannot die now, and why a rat crossed 9 counties in April to cut a boy's arm. Dumbledore looked up. Because a body may be built, there is a right. Peter Pettigrew has been in Albania for 4 years learning it, and he now has in a vial an inch of Harry's blood, and he did not need much. Nobody said anything. And the last piece, said Sirius, is in my son's head. I believe so. I believe it was an accident, the 7th fragment, torn loose when the curse rebounded, with nowhere to go but the only living thing in the room. I do not believe Voldemort knows. If he knew, he would not have sent Pettigrew for blood, he would have sent him for the boy entire. Dumbledore removed his spectacles. I had come to a conclusion about this, Sirius, some years ago. I want to tell you what it was, because you are going to find out eventually, and I would rather you heard it from me while I am still able to say it. Go on. I had concluded that the fragment could not be removed, said Albus Dumbledore, and that therefore, at the appointed hour, when all other anchors were destroyed, Harry would have to be permitted to die. The kitchen went absolutely silent. Remus made a small movement, and Sirius put a hand flat on the table without looking at him, and Remus stopped. Say the next bit, Sirius said. There's a next bit. You wouldn't have led with that unless there was a next bit. There is a next bit. Dumbledore put his spectacles back on. The next bit is that I formed that conclusion in 1982, on my own, in a locked office, at a time when the boy was a photograph in a file and a problem in a war. And I have spent 4 years reading Remus's letters about a child who eats too fast and cannot be got off a broomstick and reads the newspaper upside down. And I find that the conclusion has become entirely intolerable to me, and I no longer trust the man who reached it. He met Sirius's eyes. So I am going to do something I have not done since I was 21, which is ask another person to find me a better answer and mean it. Sirius let out a breath he'd been holding for about a minute. There's a right, he said. I thought there might be. It's not in the grimoire at Grimmauld Place. It's not in any grimoire. It's in a chained book in a house in the sea that 6 people alive have set foot in. Sirius stood up and went to the window. The Isle of Chains. My great-great-grandmother Elidora built it as a hospital, Albus. That's the thing nobody believes. Black family, 1600s, half of them were doing things that came back and got into them, and she needed somewhere to put the ones that came back. It's an eviction house. Everything on that island is built to get something out of somebody who's still alive. And the cost? There's always a cost. It's a black right, it'll be blood or years or a name. They only had the 3 ideas. Sirius turned round. I'll pay it. We're not negotiating that part. You have not read it yet. Albus, said Sirius, I've got a 10-year-old upstairs with the Dark Lord's soul in his head, and a cousin in Azkaban who's about to try to take my family off me, and a rat in Albania building his master a body out of my son's blood, and you are looking at a man with nothing whatsoever left to negotiate with. I'll read it Thursday. I'll pay it Friday. Now sit down and help me work out what Bellatrix actually wants, because she doesn't know what's in that cup, she can't. He'd never have told her, and she has spent 3 years building a legal machine to get at a vault she thinks contains her master's treasure. She does not need to know what it is, said Dumbledore quietly. She needs only to have been told it is his and that it must be kept. And she has been keeping it, Sirius, for 9 years from inside a cell, by the only means available to her, by trying to make herself the one person in Britain who can open the door. They went to the Isle of Chains on the last Thursday in June, and they took Harry, because Sirius had thought about not taking him for 11 hours and then had gone upstairs and asked, Do you want to come? Harry had looked up from a Quidditch magazine. Is it dangerous? Yes. Is it about me? Yes. Then I'm coming, said Harry, and if you'd asked me on Thursday instead of now, I'd have had time to pack. The island was 4 hours northwest of the Hebrides and looked, from the boat, like a rock with a house dropped on it. There was no harbor. There was a stair cut into the cliff, and 41 steps, and at the top a black house with too few windows and a door with no keyhole, and around the whole island, sunk in the water at low tide and visible only as a line of rust, a chain. Harry stood at the top of the stair getting his breath and looked at the house. It's not scary, he said, sounding disappointed. Give it time. No, I mean it's sad, he frowned. It looks like a hospital, like the Muggle one they took me to when Dudley pushed me off the wall. Sirius looked at his son for a moment. Yeah, he said, it is. The library was on the second floor and there were 300 books in it, and 111 of them were chained. The chains were not decorative. Remus reached for one and Sirius caught his wrist without turning round. Don't touch the ones with the red thread. Which are? The ones that bite. It took 9 hours. Dumbledore read Latin and Sirius read the Norman French and the family shorthand, and Remus made tea, and Harry, remarkably, made himself useful by sorting the loose plates and diagrams into piles on the floor. And it was Harry who found it at 2:30 in the morning on a folded sheet at the back of a book about something else entirely. There's a picture of a person with 2 hearts in, he said. Is that a thing? The rite was called the unhousing, and it had been performed 9 times and it had worked 6. Sirius read it 4 times. It's an eviction, he said at last. You can't kill it inside him, that's the whole problem, everyone's problem. The thing's a parasite and it's got its roots in his magic, and if you attack it, you kill the host. So you don't attack it, you offer it a better house. Dumbledore's head came up very sharply. You lure it, he said. You lure it. You put another vessel in the circle, something living, something of the same blood as the host, because it'll only cross to blood it recognizes. And you make the boy's body the worst place in the world to be and the other body the best. And you hold that difference open for as long as it takes, and the thing does what it's always going to do, which is look after itself. Sirius put the sheet down. And then when it's out and it's in the second vessel and it's got no roots down yet, you kill the second vessel. Nobody spoke. Which is why it's a black rite, said Sirius. Because it works, and because the second vessel has to be blood, and because for 400 years this family had a house full of cousins nobody would miss. 6 of 9, said Dumbledore. Yeah. The other 3 the thing didn't cross, stayed put, killed the host out of spite. Sirius sat back. 50-50's generous. It's better than dying at 17 because a headmaster did the arithmetic in 1982. Remus said, serious. It has to be blood. Yes. You're going to be the vessel. Yes, said Sirius, obviously. And there was a very ugly hour after that which is not worth recording in detail, in which Remus Lupin said several true things at volume and Albus Dumbledore said 1 or 2 devastating ones very quietly, and it ended, as Sirius had known it would from the beginning, with Harry. Harry had been sitting on the floor against a bookcase the entire time with his knees up, saying nothing. If it goes into you, he said, you die. Probably not. There's a... Dad? Harry's voice cracked straight down the middle. Don't do the thing where you make it sound fine. You said you don't lie to me. You've said it about 900 times, it's basically the only rule in our house. Sirius shut his eyes. If it crosses into me, he said, then they kill me quickly with the thing in me and that's the end of it. That's how the rite works. That's what the second vessel is for. I'd have about 9 seconds and I'd spend them being extremely rude to Albus. Then no, Harry was on his feet. You don't get to. You got me out of a cupboard and you fed me and you taught me to fly and you stood in front of 200 people and told them I'd get a say. And now you're going to go and die on a rock in the sea and leave me on my own with the soul removed. What's that for? What am I supposed to do with that? He was crying and furious about crying. You'd be the third thing in my head. There'd be Mum and Dad and you. Sirius crossed the room and got hold of him, and Harry hit him twice in the chest, hard, and then stopped hitting him and held on instead, and they stood there in the middle of the library on the Isle of Chains for quite a long time. All right, said Sirius over his son's head. All right, then find me another way. There is one, said Albus Dumbledore. He was standing at the window with the diagram in his hand, and something very strange had come into his face. The rite requires a living vessel of the same blood, he said. It does not require the vessel to be willing. It does not require the vessel to be innocent. And it does not, Sirius, require the vessel to be here. He turned the sheet round. It requires the vessel to be within the circle at the hour of the unhousing, and the circle may be cast anywhere the house holds ground and hearth. Sirius stared at him. Then he began very slowly to laugh. Oh no, said Remus. No, I know that laugh. I've known that laugh since I was 11. She's petitioned the hearth, said Sirius. Article 11, Kinstrife. She has, in writing, demanded to be brought out of Azkaban and placed in the fourth chamber of Gringotts in front of the House of Black. She spent 3 years on it. She's checked it 4 times. There is no lawful way for me to refuse and no lawful way for the ministry to stop it. He looked up. Bellatrix Lestrange has issued a legally binding order compelling me to put her in a ritual circle with my son. There was a silence of about 4 seconds. That, said Remus Lupin, is the single most black thing I have ever heard in my life. The Hogwarts letter came on the 31st of July, on Harry's 11th birthday, and there were 11 people at the party again, and Draco Malfoy was one of them, having arrived alone by Floo with a wrapped present and an air of a boy who has told a great many lies at home. They had 4 weeks. Sirius spent them the way he'd spent November 1986, not sleeping and being extremely thorough. The Kinstrife was set for the 24th of August, which was the earliest date the Wizengamot could be assembled and the latest Sirius could tolerate, and it was going to be, by unanimous agreement of everyone involved, an absolute circus. 11 Aurors, Amelia Bones personally. 41 Wizengamot members, because 41 was the minimum for a house matter of record, and because Sirius had refused flatly to allow the public gallery Bellatrix had asked for. Ragnarok, 4 goblin ritual clerks. A Dementor escort as far as the bank doors and not 1 inch further, on which point Sirius had threatened 3 separate departments. And beneath the floor of the 4th chamber, cut into the rock over 19 nights by 4 goblin stonemasons who had been paid an amount of money Sirius genuinely could not think about, a second circle, concentric, inert until keyed. Invisible under the standing stones of the first. She'll feel it, said Ragnarok. She'll feel something. She'll assume it's a trap of the ordinary kind. She'll assume I've laid something to kill her when the fire says no, because that's what she'd do. Sirius crouched at the edge of the chamber, looking at the hearth. That's the whole play, Ragnarok. She has to believe she's out-lawyered me. She spent 3 years being cleverer than me, and she's right, she has been. And the only way this works is if she walks in there certain. And if she is right, then the fire finds against me and she gets the house and my son, and Albus and Amelia and 11 Aurors kill her in the chamber before she leaves it, which is unlawful, and which every single one of them has already agreed to. Sirius stood up. Don't look at me like that. I've been very clear with everybody. Nobody's under any illusions and nobody's doing anything they haven't chosen. Ragnarok made a sound like gravel. You have become, he said, a very great deal like your grandfather. Yeah, said Sirius. I've noticed. I'm having a think about it. They brought her in at 11 in the morning. Sirius had prepared himself for a monster. What came down the steps into the 4th chamber of Gringotts between 4 Aurors was a tall, thin, straight-backed woman of 40 with gray in her black hair and a face like a beautiful thing left out in the weather. And she was in prison robes, and she was in chains, and she walked into that room full of Wizengamot members and looked around it with an expression of mild, aristocratic interest, as though she had come to view a property. She saw Sirius. She smiled. Cousin, Bella. You look well, she sounded like she meant it. You looked appalling in the newspapers in '86. I laughed at that too. You filled out. Creature cooks. Ah, something crossed her face, genuine and for a quarter of a second almost human. Is he well? He's furious with you. He's furious with everyone. He's fine. Good, said Bellatrix Lestrange and turned to the hearth. Ragnarok read the article. It took 11 minutes and Bellatrix listened to all of it with her head slightly on one side, checking. And at 2 points she nodded, and Sirius watched her nod and thought, she really has read it more carefully than I have. Bellatrix, daughter of Cygnus, said Ragnarok, state your accusation. She turned round to the 41. My cousin, she said, has squandered the inheritance. Her voice was extraordinary. It filled the chamber without effort. He has given away the family's oldest hearth to goblins. A stir along the benches. Ragnarok did not move a muscle. He has burned 400 years of artifacts. He has put the daughter of a Muggle solicitor on the family register. He has made himself the plaything of Albus Dumbledore. He has taken the sacred rite of the hearthblood, the crown of us, performed 4 times in 900 years, and spent it on a potter for the purpose of winning an argument in a courtroom. She let that sit, and Sirius felt it land, and it landed hard, because on the face of it every single word was true. He was raised in that house and he has spent his lordship unmaking it. And I say that a lord who despises his own house is not its steward but its enemy, and I ask the fire to look at him and say so." She turned. "And I want it minuted," she added, "that I have not asked for his death or his blood or his name, only the ring. He may go and live in a Muggle terrace with his werewolf." "I really don't care." "Lord Black," said Ragnock. "Answer." Sirius came forward. He'd written 4 speeches. He'd worked on them for a fortnight. He'd had one about the Goblin Freehold that was genuinely quite good, and one about the artifacts, and one with actual figures in it about the vaults, because the vaults were up 41% since 1986, and that was not nothing. He looked at his cousin, then he looked at the 41, then he put his hands in his pockets. "She's right," he said. The chamber made a noise. "Not about the register, Andromeda's married to the best man I know. Not about Dumbledore, he'd tell you himself I've been an unmitigated horror to him for 5 years. But about the rest. Yeah, she's right. I gave the chamber to the goblins and I'd do it again, and it was the best deal this family ever made. I burned the artifacts. I've spent 5 years taking my mother's house apart with my hands, and I've had a marvelous time." He looked up at the benches. "And I did spend the hearthblood to win an argument in a courtroom. That's not even slightly untrue. I did it in 9 days flat because it was the only weapon in the house that would fire, and if it had been a knife, I'd have used the knife." Bellatrix was watching him with her head on one side. "So, there's your accusation," said Sirius, "and I'm not going to argue with a word of it, and here's my answer." He turned to the hearth. "Harry." His son came out of the shadow at the side of the chamber where he'd been standing all along, and 41 members of the Wisengamot turned their heads, and Bellatrix Lestrange's face did something complicated. Harry Potterblack was 11 years old, and taller than he had any right to be for someone who'd been the size of a 7-year-old at 7, and he had a scar on his forearm from elbow to wrist and Lily's eyes, with 400 years of black darkness bleeding in at the edges. He walked out into the middle of the 4th chamber of Gringotts with about 400 people looking at him, and he did not hurry. "This is what I did with it," said Sirius. That was the whole speech. He stepped back to the edge of the circle, and Ragnock said, "The hearth will judge," and lit the fire, and Sirius Black put his hand into it for the 2nd time in 5 years. The white fire went up his arm and into his chest and looked. It was not like the oath. The oath had been a question with a yes or no at the end. This was something enormous and patient going through 5 years of his life, the way a man goes through a ledger, page by page, and Sirius stood in it with his teeth clenched and let it. The 11 oars on the step, and the 41 knights burning his mother's things, and the 400 galleons for the case file, and Crouch's fingers coming out of the fire, and the list of 109, and Draco Malfoy's name unsaid on a Thursday afternoon in the Wisengamot, and a 9-year-old bleeding on a lawn saying don't, and every single meal he had ever put in front of Harry Potter without being asked. And the 2nd circle under the floor keyed and waiting. That too, Sirius thought at it. Look at that too. Go on. That's the house I've built. That's what I'm using it for. And if you don't like it, you can burn my arm off and we'll both know where we stand. The fire held him for 11 seconds. Then it let go and turned, quite deliberately, and rolled across the floor of the chamber like water going the wrong way, and stopped in front of Bellatrix Lestrange. She looked down at it. "Oh," she said, and then she started to laugh great, whooping, delighted peals of it, throwing her head back, chains rattling, and it went on, and it was the most horrible sound Sirius had ever heard, and underneath it he could hear, very faintly, something breaking. "He fed you," she said to the fire. "That's it, isn't it? That's your judgment. 400 years, 17 wars, the vaults, the seats, the blood, and you looked at all of it, and you came back with he fed the boy." She wiped her eyes with her shackled hands. "God, we were stupid, weren't we, all of us? 400 years of us, and not one of you ever asked it a question." "Bella," said Sirius. "And I asked it, cousin, that's the joke, I asked it. I'm the only one in 400 years who ever—" "Bella." She stopped, still laughing, and looked at him. "I'm sorry about this," said Sirius, and keyed the 2nd circle. What happened in the next 90 seconds was, by universal agreement of everyone present, the worst thing any of them had ever seen, and there were 41 Wisengamot members in that room and 11 Aurors, and most of them had fought a war. The 2nd circle came up out of the floor as a wall of dull red light, and it took in the hearth, and Harry and Bellatrix, and nothing else. Sirius was outside it. That was deliberate, and it had cost him 3 nights of argument with Remus, and he had won by pointing out that if he was inside it, he was blood, and the thing might take him. And that was the entire disaster they were trying to avoid. Amelia Bones shouted something. 2 Aurors went for the circle and bounced. "Nobody touch it," Sirius roared. "Ragnarok, now." The unhousing was in Norman French, and Ragnarok read it very fast, and the 4 ritual clerks answered, and the temperature in the 4th chamber dropped so hard that the moisture came out of the air and fell as a fine gray snow. Harry went down on one knee. The rite worked exactly as the diagram said it would, and the diagram had been extremely honest, and Sirius had read the honest part 11 times and had still not been remotely prepared for what it looked like from 4 feet away with a wall of red light in between. "You make the host unbearable." That was the phrase in Elidora Black's neat hand. The vessel of the first part must be rendered no house at all. The circle did it by turning Harry's own magic against the fragment, not hurting him. The diagram was insistent about that. It wasn't damage. It was more like a house filling with smoke. But it did not look like that. It looked like a boy on his hands and knees on black stone screaming, with his scar open and something black and oily crawling out of it. Sirius Black stood at the edge of the circle he had made and could not go in and did not look away. "Dad, I'm here." He was on his knees in the snow with both hands flat on the light. "I'm here, I'm right here, look at me, Harry." The thing that came out of Harry Potter's forehead was the size of a fist, and it had a face in it, and the face was screaming, and it hung in the air of the 4th chamber of Gringotts, turning slowly, looking for a door. And it found one. Bellatrix Lestrange had not moved. She was standing at the hearth in her chains with her head up, and she was watching it come, and Sirius, afterwards, would remember with perfect clarity that she was not afraid. She was delighted. "My lord," said Bellatrix, and opened her arms. It went into her chest. The chains came off her. Everybody saw it, and nobody could explain it afterwards. The shackles simply fell, and she rose up onto her toes with her back arched and her mouth open, and something looked out of her eyes that was not Bellatrix Lestrange. And it turned its head slowly and found Sirius outside the circle. "Black," she said in a voice with 2 people in it. "Yeah," said Sirius. "Hello." Then the 2nd circle did the last thing on the diagram. It closed. There was no light and no noise. The red wall contracted from a circle 11 feet across to a circle 4 feet across in about a second and a half. And it did not go through Harry, because it had been cut in the stone to leave him out. And Ragnarok's masons had spent 19 nights making sure of that to within a quarter of an inch. Sirius did not look away from that either. When it was over, there was a mark on the floor and a great deal of gray snow melting, and the smell of a hearth that has gone out. And Harry Potter Black was lying on his side on the black stone 11 feet from where his father was kneeling, and the scar on his forehead was open and clean and bleeding ordinary red blood. Sirius got to him in about a second. "Harry, Harry." "Nothing." "Harry." The boy's eyes came open. "Ow," he said. Sirius Black sat down on the floor of the 4th chamber of Gringotts in front of 41 members of the Wisengamot and 11 Aurors and the entire senior staff of the bank, and put his face against his son's hair and did not speak for some time. 11 seconds, Harry croaked eventually. 94, said Sirius into his hair. I counted. He didn't sleep for 4 days after, not the useful not sleeping of a man with work to do, the other kind. He'd sit in the kitchen at 3 in the morning with a cold cup of tea and see a woman with her arms open and hear himself say, I'm sorry about this. And then he'd get up and go and stand in the doorway of the 3rd floor back bedroom for a while, watching his son breathe, and then he'd go back down and sit in the kitchen. On the 4th night, Remus came down and sat opposite him and didn't say anything for about 11 minutes. She'd have killed him, Remus said finally. I know. She'd have killed all of us, and she came into that room intending to take the house and hand it to a corpse, and she was in Azkaban for what she did to 2 people who are still in St. Mungo's staring at the ceiling, and she would have done it again on Tuesday if she'd been let out. I know all that, Moony. I knew all of it before I did it. Sirius turned the cup round. That's not the bit. Then what's the bit? The bit is that I did it beautifully, said Sirius. The bit is that I looked at my cousin's legal petition and I thought, oh, that's convenient. And I built a machine out of it, and it worked perfectly. And there was a second when the circle closed when I felt he stopped. I felt like my grandfather. For about a second and a half I was proud of the workmanship. And I'll tell you what frightens me, and then I'd like to stop talking about it forever. It wasn't hard. Not one part of it was hard. That's what the house gives you. It hands you the tools and then it hands you the reasons, and both of them fit so well. Remus considered this. And are you going to use it again? There's one more, said Sirius. There has to be. He's got a body by now, or he will have, and there's 4 objects left somewhere in Europe, and somebody's got to go and get them. And I've got 11 Weisengamot seats and a bank that likes me, and the only man alive who's done the research. That's not what I asked. No, Sirius drank his cold tea. The honest answer is that I don't know, and that the day I stop asking is the day you're allowed to shout at me. Put it in the diary. It's in the diary, said Remus. Upstairs, something fell over, and there was a muffled swear word in an 11-year-old voice, and then Creature's outraged shriek, and both men looked at the ceiling. He's meant to be asleep, said Sirius. He's meant to be packing. It's the 31st tomorrow. Oh God, said Sirius Black. So it is, and went upstairs. King's Cross on the 1st of September 1991 was chaos, and the chaos went up about 40% when Harry Potter Black came through the barrier at 11 o'clock with a trunk, an owl, a Nimbus 2000 that he was absolutely not supposed to have in first year, and the chief warlock of the Weisengamot pushing his luggage. That last part had happened in July, and nobody was more surprised about it than Sirius. Dumbledore had stood down from the chief warlock's chair in the spring. I have held 3 offices for 40 years, and I have discharged perhaps one of them well, and the vote had taken 4 rounds and Sirius had won it by 9. And he had spent the entire summer being addressed by a title that made him laugh every single time. You've got the letter for Professor McGonagall. Yep, and Creatures put the tin in the top of the trunk, and if you don't open it on the train, he'll know. I know. And if anyone gives you grief about the arm or the head or your mum or me, I hex them, said Harry. You don't hex them, said Sirius. You tell me and I'll hex them. I'm Chief Warlock now. I can probably get away with it. Harry laughed. Then he stopped laughing and looked at the train, and he was 11, and he was suddenly and visibly not ready. Dad. Yeah. What if it's still in there? Sirius crouched down, which he could only just still do without it being embarrassing for both of them. Ptolemy Vance ran it 9 times, he said. So did the goblins. So did Albus. It reads as one person, Harry. It's read as one person for 11 days, and it's going to read as one person for the rest of your life. But what if? Then we'll deal with it, and it'll be horrible, and we'll deal with it. Sirius took him by the shoulders. Listen, you've got 4 things, and I want you to keep them where you can reach them. Creature's tin. Dora's address, and she's an Auror now, and she means it about the letters. Remus is on the staff list from January. Don't tell him I told you. And me, any hour of the day or night. You send that owl and I will be at that gate inside 40 minutes, and I don't care what it's about. If it's a bad dream, if it's a bad essay, I have swum the North Sea, Harry. I'm not going to be put off by Scotland. Harry nodded. His chin was doing something. Right, said Sirius and stood up and pushed him at the train. Go on, before you cry and it gets in the papers. Harry got 3 steps and then turned round and came back and hugged him hard enough to bruise. In the middle of platform 9 3/4, in front of 400 people and at least 2 photographers, and Sirius Black, Lord of the most ancient and most noble house of Black, Chief Warlock of the Weisengamot, escaped convict, ex-prisoner of Azkaban, father, put his arms round his son and held on. I love you, said Harry into his coat. I know. Go and be a nightmare. The whistle went at 11 o'clock exactly, and the train started to move, and Sirius stood on the platform in the steam with his hands in his pockets and watched it go, and did not leave until it was completely out of sight, which took rather longer than it should have because he had gone and got misty, and the platform was full of parents pretending not to notice each other doing exactly the same thing. In the 4th compartment from the end, Harry Potter Black had got his trunk up on the rack by himself, and was sitting by the window with Creature's tin already open on his knees, when the door slid back. A red-headed boy stood there looking hunted. Anyone sitting there, everywhere else is full. No, go on. The boy heaved his trunk in, failed, went red, and got it in on the 3rd go with Harry hauling on the other end. He sat down opposite out of breath, and then his eyes went to Harry's forehead and stuck there. Are you? Yeah, "Blimey," said the boy, "Ron Weasley." "Harry," he held out the tin. "There's about 9 kinds of thing in here, and my house elf will actually die if I bring any of it home, so you'd be doing me a favor." Ron Weasley looked into the tin, and then at Harry, and something in his face relaxed all the way down. "Bloody hell," he said, and took a treacle tart. Somewhere around Peterborough the door slid back again, and a girl with an enormous quantity of brown hair put her head in and said, in a voice that suggested she'd been rehearsing it, "Has anyone seen a toad?" "A boy called Neville's lost one." "No," said Ron through pastry. "Sorry," said Harry, "but we can help look if you want. I'm Harry." She came in about a foot and stopped, and Harry watched her decide not to say the thing everyone said and liked her immediately for it. "Hermione Granger," she said. "Actually, could I ask you something first? Because I've been asking everyone and nobody knows, and it's been driving me mad since the barrier." "Go on." "Is it real?" said Hermione Granger. "The platform, the wall, all of it. My parents watched me walk through a wall and they've gone home, and I keep thinking someone's going to tell me it was a trick." Harry Potterblack thought about a cupboard with a bolt on the outside, and a light the size of a marble sitting on a plastic soldier, and a man in a fisherman's coat saying you're a wizard at 3 o'clock in the morning. "It's real," he said. "Sit down, I'll show you something. Have you got a jug?"